Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm and you are watching first part of What If Naruto was executed and returned as a vampire god. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Alucard is observing his surroundings. He is in a completely white area. Where am I? The Nosferatu thought that his defeat to the Major was the last thing he recalled. Greetings, Count Dracula, or should I say Alucard? She said, looking up to see a purple humanoid with white hair, two blood-red horns between his hair, and a dagger between his teeth. A white robe was worn by the humanoid. A normal person would find him intimidating, but Alucard was anything but, he simply said. The figure simply grinned, his dagger still between his teeth, and said, I have gone by many names, chose one you like. When Alucard asked, what about Naruto Uzumaki? His eyes simply widened before taking on a regretful expression. Alucard then simply recalled the life of the person he once was but wished to forget. He's dead together with the love of his life. Before and after the academy, he recalled his life, his purported friendship with Iruka, his graduation, his team, the mission to Wave, the Chunin exams, his time with Jiraiya and Tsunade, his so-called family, his rescue mission, and the consequences. Rewind, the shirtless, bloodied form of Naruto Uzumaki said, just a few meters and we're there Sasuke. A large hole on his left, above the heart, was already filling in. He carried Uchiha Sasuke on his back, suffering only minor injuries to his stomach after Naruto, who was fully Chidori'd in the shoulder, shoved a low-powered Rasengan at him. Tsunade Senju, Sakura Haruno, Ino Yamanaka, a couple of Chunin, and Hinata Hyuga, who was observing from a distance, were waiting for them. The strain on Naruto's body caused him to collapse just as he entered the village. After Tsunade had taken the Uchiha and begun to examine him, Naruto turned over on his back and addressed Sakura directly, saying. He had a lot of expectations, but a kick to the stomach from Ino and a groin kick from Sakura weren't among them. Sakura-chan, I fulfilled my promise to you. Naruto appeared surprised that Sakura could think so poorly of him. You idiot, I asked him to bring him back, but you just had to beat him because you couldn't have me. As he continued, Ino kicked him in the face and said, Sakura-chan, he really wanted to leave the village, it's... Naruto was about to say something when Tsunade gave him a full force punch. Shut up, like Sasuke-kun wouldn't do something like that, it's just that you're jealous of him, you demon. Naruto's eyes widened. Naruto squirmed and coughed up blood. Then he turned to face Tsunade and inquired. Tsunade simply glared at him and asked, why? You know why, you killed Kushina-chan, she was like a daughter to me, you filthy demon. Now for severely injuring a leaf.nin, you are going to be executed, Anbu. That was the end of his story. Flashback ends. His friends paid him a visit after he was locked up. The purpose of their visit was to torture him. Shino was eaten by his bugs. Akamaru urinated acid in his eyes. Neji thrust him in the gut with a juken palm, and the other members of the Rookie and Team 9s gave him a traditional beating. Naruto still had some fighting left when they left, but that changed when he noticed Iruka wearing a sneer. Rewind, Naruto was shocked to learn that even Iruka, the first person to recognize him, believed he was the Kyuubi. How does it feel to be tricked? Kyuubi, do you really think that we couldn't see you for what you truly are? He asked. Instead of being cerulean, his glazed to a dark blue. His head drooped. Iruka gave him a kick after glancing at him and saying. He departed after saying, this is for my parents, you never were a student of mine. After a while, he heard the gate to his cell open once more. He didn't look up, assuming it was someone else who would harm him. The noise ceased in front of him, and he heard a jar open, most likely containing a salve or acid that would heal his wounds so they could torment him further. Subsequently, a hand began applying a gel to one of his wounds. It was undoubtedly a gentle one. Naruto pondered what the gel accomplished, as it didn't cause any pain, indicating that it wasn't an acid. When he looked up, he noticed two lavender eyes filled with tears. With a hint of surprise, he asked, Hinata, what are you doing here? Hinata simply took a moment to apply the salve to his wound before moving on to another and beginning the procedure anew. I can't heal your wounds, because they will just reopen, I can only stop the pain, I'm sorry, I can't do more Naruto.kun. The last thing Naruto said was. Hinata-chan, why don't you hurt me, I'm just a monster. No. You aren't a monster, you're Uzumaki Naruto, container of the Kyuubi, the most surprising ninja in Konoha. You're also the man who I fell in love with, she said with all her might. Naruto's eyes came back to life and turned azure once more. Hinata-chan, could you please do the wound on my cheek? Hinata blushed at the sound of the question, but she still obeyed. However, Naruto was relishing the sensation of her hand on his cheek when he inquired. Before she could inquire why, Naruto leaned forward and kissed her on the lips. Hinata-chan, could you bring your face a bit closer? She repeated. As Hinata flushed, she broke down in tears and said, "Thank you, Hinata-chan. Thanks to you I know that my life was not in vain, thank you." Hinata wiped away her tears and gave him a lovely smile, saying, "Hinata-chan, don't cry, I like it more when you smile." Naruto then gave him one of his infrequent genuine smiles in return and uttered the following quietly. She left after giving him one final look. "Hinata-chan, I will come back to you one day. Believe it, that's a promise longer than a lifetime. Now, go before guards find us." Flashback ends. Other individuals arrived hoping to obtain a piece of the demon. They all tormented him differently, up until the day of the execution, that persisted. Rewind. Tsunade eyed Uzumaki Naruto's form. His blood stained pants, which were all he had left, were red. Scars, cuts, bruises, and other wounds covered his entire body, and the words, Kyuubi and Demon, were carved on his chest. He had red and dirty blonde hair. There were 6 scars where the whisker marks were on his face. He is missing both of his eyes and a few teeth. He turned to face Tsunade, who uttered, "How does it feel, Kyuubi?" He said defiantly, "Not bad, old bitch." Then Tsunade gave him a fist to the stomach. After coughing up some blood, Naruto uttered. Tsunade simply growled, "Watch out, old hag, you don't want me dead before the Uchiha can do it." 2 Anbu appeared out of nowhere and took him to the center of the village, saying, "Tish brat, bring him to the center." Sasuke and Kakashi were waiting for Naruto on a platform in the middle of the plain, while the villagers, with the exception of one Hyuga, were gathered around the town, anxiously awaiting the demon's dead. The crowd jeered and threw trash at Naruto when he arrived in chains. He somehow found Hinata when he reached the stairs and met her gaze. She initially wanted to turn away when she saw the vacant spaces where his once beautiful eyes had been, but she kept looking at him. After he mouthed the words, "I love you too," Hinata was pleased but felt like crying because he was going to die. She simply smiled and he gave her one in return. Tsunade yelled as he reached the platform. "We have come here to kill the traitor, Naruto Uzumaki, for his crimes against Konoha. His executor is none other than Sasuke Uchiha." That caused the crowd to explode. Sasuke charged up his Chidori and made 3 hand signs. "Look at that, here you are. I'm free and you're in chains. By killing you I will gain the Mangekyo, this proves I'm your better. Any last words, Dobi?" he said to the blonde. The blonde merely laughs, looks up, and says. Sasuke simply became enraged and pushed his Chidori into Naruto's heart, saying, "Foolish Teme. I will win this one." To his surprise, his eyes remained the same as he waited for the changes to occur. Naruto's final words were, "I won." Sasuke sobbed in rage after losing to the Dobi once more. Flashback ends. He glanced at the purple figure after his trip down memory lane and inquired, "Why did you bring it up? To torment me?" Alucard gave him a startled look when the figure asked, "Did you know that she's still alive?" The figure's smile widened as he said, "Explain, that's more than 500 ago. Did you know that times flows different in dimension? What here is more than 500 years is in another dimension a little bit less than 3 years. Alucard continues to whisper. "Only 3 years? Why are you telling me this? I made a mistake by giving the sage the powers of chakra. It seems that humans abuse their powers. I need someone to give them a message. You're that someone. Normally you would be able to leave this place after you destroyed all your familiars, but instead I purged Schrödinger from your body. After you have done your job, I will send you back to your coffin 30 years after your defeat. You even may take the Hyuga if she wants it. Do you accept?" Alucard laughs and then gives a thoughtful look on his face. "What about my guns and the gloves? The gloves will restrict me, since I'm not fighting on orders. Your jackal is repaired. Your guns will never be able to run out of bullets. I've modified your gloves. They will help you control your powers instead so you don't harm innocents. Just say, release control art restriction system, plus the levels you want to release. I even give you back Baskerville. Do you accept?" "Yes. By the way, am I free of Helsing now?" Alucard left after saying, "Yes, now go. I advise you to go to Suna first." Alucard was only a mile from Sunagakure when he got to Suna. He simply began to walk to Sunagakure. He was wearing orange glasses, a fedora hat, a red suit, and a cravat. Why did he have a drop in the middle of the day when the sun is at its highest? Tamari stopped him at the gates. He doesn't think she's changed much. Her voice was demanding as she said. Alucard simply grinned and asked, "Who are you and what is your business here?" Asuna Chunin just said, "My name is Alucard and I'm here to visit an old friend of mine named Sabaku no Gara." As Alucard's grin widened, he asked, "What do you want with our cage?" Tamari then cut him off, saying, "Oh, he made cage alright, that's impressive, I have to give my congratulations." Alucard scowled and ordered one of the Chunin. "He isn't here at the moment, he's kidnapped by 2 members of the Akatsuki." The Chunin glanced at Tamari hesitantly, but she simply nodded, and he departed. "You, get me something that has his smell, now." Asking the Nosferatu, "By the way, are those Akatsuki strong?" Tamari nodded and said, "Incredible strong," Alucard just stated. "Good." Then a man's voice interrupted. It was none other than Sasuke Uchiha who said, They may be strong for the likes of you, but for an elite like me they're nothing." Sakura, Kakashi, and a black-haired nin, Sai, were all present. Alucard desired to murder him, but the moment was not right. He said dismissively, "Silence, the adults are talking." Sakura then stood by Sasuke, who was incensed by the remark. "You shouldn't be talking like that to Sasuke-kun, he's head of the Uchiha clan." Sasuke was about to respond when a Chunin with a sand gourd showed up. "I couldn't care less if you're in a clan or not." As he placed the gourd down, the Chunin said, "This is cage. Sama's gourd as you requested." Alucard simply approached the gourd and took a whiff. Gaara's gourd smelled of blood, which startled Tamari and the Chunin. "Ah, what a delightful smell. What sort of man would enjoy the smell of blood?" Think, Tamari. He then vanished into a swarm of bats and followed a trail he had discovered. "Well, it was nice meeting you, Suna.nin, but I have a friend to save. Goodbye." Sakura asked, "Sensei, did he just become a group of bats?" But Sai responded rather than Kakashi. "Not necessarily, it could be Genjutsu followed by a Shunsen, but that takes a lot of skill to do, so either he has an unknown Kekkei Genkai or he is very skilled, either way he's dangerous." Kakashi stepped in after Sakura said, "You're exaggerating, didn't you see how he clothed? He's not a shinobi, he didn't even have a forehead protector." Sai is right, he's dangerous, but he also implied that he can find someone with his smell. The sample he used was Gaara's sand, but since that the smell is mixed with the smell of his other victims means he has an incredible smell surpassing even the Inuzuka. So I guess it's a Kekkei Genkai. Tamari.san, who was he? Tamari was just saying. "I don't know, his name was Alucard, he said he was a friend of him." Tamari scowled at Sasuke as he said, "I didn't know that freak had friends." The group trailed her through the village, but Kakashi had his sights set on Alucard. "Come, I will bring you to my brother who fought one of the Akatsuki." He undoubtedly displayed some animosity, or at the very least, resentment, toward us. I wonder why. With his thoughts focused on Konoha, Alucard flew towards Gaara in bat form while Team 7 was occupied in Suna. I really wanted to tear that piece of shit apart, but that will only draw needless attention to myself. I need to think this out or I'll end up like I did a century ago, a slave to the Helsing family and stripped of my power. Since I haven't used tactics in a while, I may be a little rusty. As he was formulating his plan to demolish Konoha, he came to a roadblock. A boulder bearing a piece of paper. It was night when he got there, so he changed into his regular shape, gazed at the boulder, and uttered, "Open sesame." He phased slipped through the boulder when it remained motionless. He gazed at the scene after he had fully developed. 9 people, 2 solid, 7 ethereal, are represented by a giant statue with many eyes on its fingers. Apparently, they failed to notice him. Gaara was suspended in a form of energy, most likely chakra, in the air. Then he walked over to the 9 and announced his arrival. One of the individuals, whose eyes seemed to be ringing, said. The 7 figures and the statue vanished, and Gaara collapsed to the ground. It appears that we were followed. The ritual will have to wait until he has been eliminated. Deidara, Sasori kill him. The blonde bomber remarked, "It looks like we will have some fun before we start the extraction." Sasori gave him a look and remarked. Alucard simply drew his weapons and positioned himself, saying, "Deidara, be careful, I don't get a reading on his chakra." Deidara placed his hands in the satchels next to him, while Sasori continued to fight by extending his metal tail. Alucard simply aimed his castle and fired 6 shots, 3 of which struck the tail, throwing it off balance, and the remaining 3 struck the back, bruising the wood but not penetrating it entirely. As he was ready to shoot Sasori, Alucard saw two birds approaching and used his jackal to shoot them, causing them to explode before their time. Sasori made use of the allotted time and fired a barrage of senbon at him. Alucard made no attempt to dodge. He simply shot at the puppeteer and pointed his jackal at Sasori. The puppet was shattered when the bullets struck its armor, and the puppeteer hurried away from it. Alucard laughed and then laughed uncontrollably in response to the statement, "It's been a long time since Hariko was destroyed, but it's over. Some of the senbon have hit your vitals, and even if it didn't, the poison will kill you." Deidara asked, "What's so funny? Did you really think that some needles and poison will kill me?" The senbon said, leaving Alucard's body without any visible wounds. "I'm just happy that they're still idiots like you." Excited by the prospect of a good fight, Alucard said, "Come on, the night is still young, let's have some fun together." With that, Sasori pulled out a scroll, and a puppet emerged. "It seems I have no choice, I will have to use this." He wore a black outfit and had black hair. "I haven't used the sandame in a long time." The puppet's mouth began to leak a black substance. It was identified as iron by Alucard. Just as he was about to react, two enormous centipedes sprang up out of the ground, wrapped themselves around his legs, and then burst. The explosion against the rock at the entrance blew Alucard away. Deidara just stated, "Don't underestimate us. Sasori Ma, he's done for." Sasori was about to turn around when Alucard, who was already on his feet, burst out laughing. When Alucard volleyed at them, the black sand rose to shield them both. Sasori retaliated by having the sandame raise his arm at Alucard, and then a number of additional mechanical arms appeared out of them. "You two are very amusing." Alucard shot the farthest left arm after swaying to the left. The others simply struck rock or air. The various clay birds of Deidara were then shot by him. The two then took a break when Sasori threw waves of sand at Alucard. "Sasori, man, how does he that with that weapon?" The weapon throws pieces of metal at an incredible speed. The speed causes the extreme damage. But why aren't they affected by the puppet, and how did he made clay birds explode? It's the speed. Your clay bombs are like balloons that contain chakra. The metal fragment will cause the balloon's membrane to burst, releasing the chakra. Released. The metal is most likely not magnetic for my puppet to be immune, the puppeteer said. They fled when Alucard shot at them. Alucard then removed Deidara from the fight by shooting him in the legs and off his hand. Sasori was about to throw his metal sand at Alucard after giving him a quick glance. Alucard ducked and attempted to hit the puppet, but the sand shielded it. Instead, he charged the puppet, punched through the sand, and destroyed it. Sasori simply said, glancing at Alucard. Then 100 puppets materialized, surrounded Alucard, and charged him. Alucard fired as many of them as he could with his gun before sheathing them and engaging in hand-to hand combat. "To use my greatest art on one person, it's such a shame. Be prepared for my secret." Performance of 100 puppets. In the end, it turned into an attrition battle in which Sasori could give each puppet more attention, forcing them to kill, while Alucard destroyed puppet after puppet. His wounds from the puppet's weapons were instantly healed. Alucard ultimately destroyed the final puppet. Alucard then approached him. He pulled out his jackal, but then had to dodge a stream of flames. "It was a great fight, Sasori, but in the end you just weren't strong enough." Then he noticed a tube sticking out of Sasori's arm. Alucard said, "So you made yourself a living puppet?" Sasori simply replied. Alucard reported, "Yes, I made myself a puppet making me eternal, and with this body I will kill you." He then shot Sasori in the heart, saying, "You fool, there's no such thing as eternal and you can't kill me, because only human can kill monsters." "How? I smelled it." Sasori's final words before leaving the Red Sands were, "It seems my art will be lost." Alucard simply glanced at Deidara, who was terrified after witnessing the altercation. Alucard simply approaches him. Deidara attempts to flee, but he is unable to do so due to his leg injury. Alucard absorbed the insane bomber by taking his head in both arms and biting him in the neck. Taking his gun, he pointed it at him and fired. It struck the wall. Alucard then took Gaara and woke him up, saying, "Damn, he got away." Gaara was terrified when he woke up and saw Alucard's eyes, which were very similar to his own before Naruto saved him. The only difference was that the stranger's eyes displayed greater control. Alucard simply smiled and asked, "Where am I? Who are you and what happened with Akatsuki?" Gaara's eyes widened as he said, "We're in Akatsuki's lair where I killed 2 of their members. He had only defeated 2 of them, but was unable to defeat 1. Alucard's smile widened, "But you still haven't said who you are." In a mocking tone of hurt, he said, "I'm hurt, don't you recognize your good old friend?" Friend, what did he mean? The only person who was able to be considered a friend was. He stammered, impossible, Naruto? But you're supposed to be dead. His answer was, oh, I am. He started to ask more questions, but Alucard interrupted him, saying, but how are you standing here? What happened to you? Gaara obeyed, and the boulder moved away, creating the passageway. I will be telling you this later, but we are in enemy territory. Now go to that boulder and make the hand signs rat, boar, and dragon and channel chakra in the rock. As Gaara prepared to depart, Alucard uttered. Gaara simply nodded and levitated some sand to carry them both. My name is Alucard. Don't want my enemies to become aware of my existence, don't we? She asked. He shook his head when Gaara invited him to the platform, saying. Gaara gave him a brief glance before letting himself drop to the ground, and they strolled through the woods together. It's such a beautiful night, let's just enjoy it for a little longer. Gaara said, you've changed. Alucard simply laughed. Gaara looked at him and said, more than you think. So how does it feel to be Cage? It feels good, to be respected, to be loved. Is it respect or is it fear? Do they love you or do they secretly despise you? Do they see you as a great leader or do they see you as someone useful? Replied Alucard. Fearing that his efforts would be in vain, Gaara said, what do you mean? Of course they love, respect, and see me as a great leader, otherwise they wouldn't have made me Cage. Not necessarily, they could have thrown you a bone. With the dead of the Jinchuriki in Konoha, they would be afraid that you, their weapon, would turn against them. So they give you the pretense that you still had a chance to be loved. They even would give you the title of Cage. It would seem of course that you pull the strings while instead they pull them from your shadow. You would be nothing then a dog, their well-trained guard dog. Gaara asked, are you saying that all my efforts are in vain? I don't know, but we'll see. I'm just saying how it could be. Alucard replied. They kept walking until dawn, when they came to the forest's edge. Then they came to a field. Temari, Shio, the 4 Konoha ninja, and a number of Suna.nin were on the meadow. When the group saw them, the two approached them slowly and said, Cage. Sama, you're back, we thought you were dead. Alucard looked Gaara in the eyes and said, welcome back. Alucard gave him an honest smile and Gaara simply looked at him and smiled back. I guess you were right. Indeed, my friend. Thank you, Gaara. Gaara then gave Alucard a perplexed look. For what? He inquired. Alucard just stated, for fulfilling my dream. Gaara asked, Temari, why are Konoha.nin here? Given that Gaara had not liked Konoha since Naruto's death, Temari was a little uneasy when she said, we hired them to help with us rescuing you. I'm sorry if it disturbs you. It's not a bother, but since I'm safe, Alucard interrupted, saying, wait, we still have a use for them. Gaara asked, what is that? Kakashi then chose to join the discussion, saying, well, you need to be escorted while the Suna.nin raid the Akatsuki base for information on them. That will be an extra mission. Kakashi congratulated himself on his scheme to make money for Konoha, but Alucard shattered his illusions. Sorry, but this still count as the first since Gaara isn't in Sanagakure. That's a good idea. Shio, you take the Chunin and raid the base, the rest will return to Sanagakure. Gaara replied. Gaara looked him in the eye and said, my friend, I would advise you since the old woman would hide information about his grandson. How did you know that? Gaara thought, human minds are far too easy to invade. What about Shukaku, and how did you do that? Alucard merely laughed in his head when he asked Gaara in disbelief. Shukaku will act with just a basic ability, will you not? As Shukaku cowered inside his gourd-shaped prison, Alucard asked him with a sly smile. Why.ye.es. For Shukaku to cower in terror. Who are you thinking? Gaara. Alucard laughs. Dead, I will leave your mind. It appeared to onlookers that Alucard and Gaara were engaged in a staring contest. Gaara looked away and uttered. Temari and the Suna.nin departed after saying, I'm sorry, Shio. You will come back with me. Temari, you will lead the group. The base is inside a cave in the middle of the forest. Gaara said, turning to face Shio. Shio simply gave him a small smile and said, I'm sorry, but he convinced me. With that, the Konoha.nin, Gaara, Shio, and Alucard left. During the trip, Kakashi made the decision to learn more about Gaara's savior. It's okay, the man was right. I would let my emotions take control when it comes to my grandson and that could make things worse. Come on, let's go. It was Alucard. How was the Cage saved? Alucard chose to play a little after spotting Kakashi's plans. I went in, destroyed the two members of the Akatsuki, woke up Gaara and left. That easy? Kakashi was asked. Yes, the vampire replied. Sasuke boastfully remarked, if they were beaten that easily by you then they were weaklings. Sakura was backed by the statement, yeah, Sasuke would take far less time to defeat them. Tell me how many S-class nin you two have vanquished. When I asked Alucard, neither of them responded. I'm going to assume that 0 isn't, Alucard continued. Sasuke angrily remarked, if you hadn't stepped in, I would have had those two. But you haven't, so at the moment I'm stronger at the moment, Alucard replied. I'll show you who's stronger, so why you? Sasuke shouted as he was getting ready to make hand signs. Sasuke stopped but glared at Alucard as Kakashi grabbed his wrist and said, stop it. Now is not the time. Sasuke, we have a mission. This is not over, not by long shot. Alucard grinned maniacally and said, I wouldn't have it another way. Alucard, do you have any parents from Kiri or are you from there yourself? Sakura inquired. Alucard said, no, they claim that the people there have sharp teeth, so why do you have them? I am an exception. They kept going until they reached Sanagakure, where Gaara spoke to the Konoha Shinobi. Although I don't like you, I will pay you for the mission. He then gave the order for a Chunin to carry the money, and Gaara handed it to them. You may now depart from my domain. After what you did to Naruto, my daimyo made me continue the alliance, which is already enough. In an attempt to extract as much money as possible from Gaara, Kakashi said, there's a problem with you see, we want to be paid for healing your brother Kankuro after he was poisoned by Sasori. That itself is another A-rank mission. Gaara, I advise you to decline their request that since they needed him for your rescue, that means that still falls under the first contract, Alucard replied. With venom in his voice, Kakashi said, you stay out of it, this is business between Suna and Konoha. But that doesn't mean that he isn't right, so I will not pay for it. In fact, I should demand payment for the use of our greenhouse, but I will let it slide, since we're not as stingy as you. All right, Team 7, let's head back. Kakashi and his group returned to Konoha. Now, Alucard, what are you going to do? Gaara asked. First I am going to need information, then I will plan my next move, Alucard replied. Can I then extend an invitation for you to stay at my house? Gaara asked. Alucard said, I'm fine with that. The people smiled at Gaara as he made his way to his office, and Alucard simply wandered around the town until he finally had enough and headed for the Cage Tower. Tamari welcomed him to the tower. Alucard.san, please come to the tower so I can give you my report. They walked to Gaara's office together. There are some things that don't seem right, maybe you can help me with them. The door was knocked on by Tamari. Come in, Gaara said. Kankuro was with him when they entered Gaara's office, and although he was a little intimidated by Alucard, he kept it to himself. Who is this guy, Tamari? Tamari opened his mouth to reply, but Gaara spoke first. As Kankuro heard, he went pale. He's an old friend of mine. He saved me from the Akatsuki, defeated 2 members. You overcame Sasori of the Red Sands, then? Alucard recently added. Kankuro went even paler when he said, and Deidara the Mad Bomber. So, Tamari, have you discovered anything in the cave? Yes, we found a lot of puppets in the room, but there were some abnormalities. Like what? Gaara asked. She then showed them a bullet and turned to face Alucard. The first thing were pieces of silver, also pieces of a gold alloy. They were all around the cave and some were even found in the puppets. I suppose they have to do something with Alucard's abilities. Am I correct? Alucard simply nodded. The other oddity was that, of the 2, only one was an arm. I'm not sure where the other bodies are. Do you know anything about it, Alucard? Kankuro simply glanced at Alucard and said, yes, Sasori's body should be with the puppets and I disposed off Deidara's body. With the puppets, what do you mean? He created a human puppet out of himself. The only human aspect of him was a round, purple container. In addition, he turned the Sandame Cage into a puppet. The 3 of them gaped at Alucard, and Gaara was the first to regain his senses. I'm going to call this Kinjutsu. It's simply unethical. Kankuro was about to object, but changed his mind and said nothing. Gaara went on. Tamari, is that all? Yes, Gaara. He then made a sound barrier out of sand and turned to face Alucard. The 2 siblings turned to Alucard in disbelief and said, you owe me an explanation, Naruto. What? They shouted. Calmly, Alucard said, you look like you're seeing a ghost. How did you make it through? Tamari asked. I didn't. How is that possible, huh? Kankuro asked. Gaara made 3 chairs out of sand, and Alucard, Tamari, and Konkuro sat down on them. Simple, I'm dead. Seeing that is it going to be a long conversation. Gaara, could you do me a favor and get me a blood pack or two? Fine, now tell me what happened at your execution. I'm not quite sure. I think that after my death, I was being dragged inside a new body with my memories sealed, but during an event, the rape, I regained them. Explained the Nosferatu. What happened? Tamari asked. Alucard said, it's a personal one. They were chatting when a sand clone of Gaara entered with a blood pack, and then he suddenly conjured a glass. The 3 of them just stared at Alucard, who then took the blood pack from the clone, tore off a corner of it, and filled his glass with blood. He put his glass on the table, took a rubber band from his coat, and tied the blood pack stuck. Next, he took the glass, stirred it, sniffed, and sipped the wine. Incredulous, the 3 continued to stare at Alucard. A male, 55 years old with blood group AB positive, not bad. A strong, well, aged flavor. Alucard took note. Where had my etiquette gone? Would you like some too? Gaara was the first to reply after the 3 of them snapped out of it. Sorry, but we have to decline. Tamari was taken aback by his brother's courteous reply. How do you let him do such things, Gaara? It's just wrong that he's drinking human blood. Gaara simply did not respond. As I see it, he's not completely human, so he's eating like a normal person is eating food. Can't he just drink animal blood? It's just wrong. Knowing his brother was correct, Tamari muttered. Animals cannot keep us alive. They would only slow down our rate of degradation. Do you have any more inquiries? Alucard inquired. Yes. Who are you? Konkuro asked the question. I'm a vampire, a child of the night. And in order to survive, vampires consume human blood? Alucard simply nodded. Are you able to do anything else? Gaara asked. We can't be certain that we won't be overheard, so I can't tell them everything, but let me say this. We have superhuman speed and strength, improved senses, and advanced healing. Anything else? Tamari simply wanted to get out of there, but Konkuro asked Alucard something. Not that I could think of. Gaara then released the sand barrier. Do you have a preferred flavor since you consume blood in the same way that we consume food? Alucard grinned and uttered. Tamari went pale and hurried out of the room, saying, I do love female virgins and blondes, just leaves such a refined aftertaste. Konkuro left the room, leaving Gaara and Alucard alone. That was a mean thing to do, Alucard. Gaara then directed some murderous intent towards Alucard, saying, I seriously meant everything. Alucard simply shrugged off the killer's intent, saying, you will leave my sister or any inhabitant of Sinagakure alone. Saying, I didn't had any intentions of the kind, eliminated the desire to kill. What will you do now, then? Alucard wanted to go, but a Chunin entered, so he said, I don't know yet. The Cage turned to face the Chunin and said, Cage, Sama, I have bad news. Go on. Gaara's eyes widened as she said, Konoha has invaded and taken over Wave Country. What? He started to say something else, but Alucard's laughter interrupted him. Gaara, I know what to do now, I'm going to Wave Country. A ninja, based on the headband on his forehead, stopped Alucard as he was strolling through the woods at a clearing that was a portion of the boundary between Suna and Konoha. Halt, tell me about yourself and your goals. Alucard recognized him as Konohamaru, a short man with brown hair who appeared to be a genin. He wore a green jacket, gray pants, and a blue scarf. He recalled how the boy had called him his ni-san. Backstory. Dungeon prior to execution. As Naruto waited in his cell for the next session or beating, whichever came first, he was suddenly struck in the stomach. He thought, so another session, seeing that the fist was small, he concluded that the Sandame's law was no longer in effect. He then looked up and saw Konohamaru's face, which remained expressionless even when he saw the forms of Moegi and Udon. So you too, Moegi, Udon, Konohamaru? Moegi then gave him a slap. Demon, stop it. I hate you because you caused the deaths of the majority of our family members who fought against you. She started crying now, but Naruto remained silent. The 3 of them simply turned around and walked away, with Konohamaru giving them one last look before they vanished. Flashback end. He looked at Konohamaru's mind and saw that they hadn't changed at all. Perhaps they have changed their ways after 3 years, but they did get older and hopefully smarter over the years. Oh, well, guess not. Alucard then gave the poor boy a mental command. The boy trembled and pulled a kunai from his pouch, bringing it to his neck as the trembling got worse. The knife then cut his skin, causing Konohamaru to start perspiring. He was about to cut any more, but a gloved hand stopped him. The hand belonged to Ebisu, who was accompanied by two other genin, Moegi and Udon, and whose clothes had not changed since Alucard had last seen him. "What are you doing, honorable grandson, and who is this man?" As Ebisu asked, Konohamaru glanced at the ground and cautiously at Alucard. Ebisu then scowled at Alucard and said, "I don't know, I had this sudden urge to slit my throat, it was really strong, I couldn't resist it." "That was genjutsu, but he directly affected your desires rather than your senses. That indicates that he is a very good genjutsu user, so watch out, honorable grandson. What are your plans and who are you now?" Alucard merely grinned and uttered. Ebisu's eyes narrowed as he said, "I'm just a traveler passing by." "Name? You may call me Alucard. Are you authorized to cross this border?" Alucard remained silent. Alucard ignored him and began to move in Wave's direction, but Ebisu stopped him with a kunai aimed at him. "Then I'm afraid we can't let you pass. Come back in a few days, it's just that we have had a raid by Akatsuki, a week ago." The two were silent until an almost inaudible whisper was heard. "I will state it again, you are not allowed to pass this border, we will enforce even if we have to resort to violence." "Are you sure you can stop me?" Ebisu simply raised his spectacles and uttered. Alucard simply began to move and uttered, "I know, we can. You're welcome to try." Konohamaru then charged him and engaged him in hand combat. He threw a punch at him, but Alucard just sidestepped and drew his castle and dodged a kick that Konohamaru aimed at him. He then aimed at Udon, who saw that Alucard had aimed at his arm and had evaded the bullet, but the bullet still grazed his arm. Moegi and Ebisu then began to make hand signs, with Alucard dodging the spikes that were raised out of the ground directly beneath his feet. Moegi tried genjutsu on him, but it didn't work, so Alucard just aimed at Udon again, who was drawing on the floor, and rolled away, this time avoiding the bullet perfectly. At the same time, Alucard aimed a punch at Konohamaru, who dodged by doing a backflip, placing him next to Ebisu. Moegi then asked a question. "Why didn't my genjutsu work on Ebisu, sensei?" Ebisu raised his glasses once more and uttered. This time, Moegi drew two kunai. She charged and slashed at the vampire, but Alucard just dodged and aimed at Udon again, who jumped away just in time. "Moegi, don't forget he's a genjutsu user. He probably recognized your hand signs and dispelled genjutsu immediately. Now switch to formation 2. Both Konohamaru and Ebisu prepared their own methods. With that, a mud dragon launched multiple mud balls at Alucard in the Earth-style, Earth Dragon Bullet. Alucard deftly avoided the flaming bullets hurled at him, and Ebisu simply grinned and remarked, "Fire-style, Fire Dragon Bullet." Konohamaru blew a stream of fire at the mud bullets, causing them to ignite. "Everyone, you fell straight into our trap." Each of Ebisu, Konohamaru, and Moegi leapt to a location where Udon had been drawing on the ground, where a seal glowed, and they infused them with chakra as they spoke. Gravity Enforcement Seal. Ebisu began his explanation after Alucard was dragged to the ground, landing on his knee, hand, and then his entire body. "You see, since Udon-kun was the focal point of our strategy, it was wise for you to attack him first." The four began using hand signs as he drew the gravity enforcement seal, which repeatedly raised the gravity between the four seals before ending. The four yelled. Fire style. Great fireball technique. A stream of fire slammed into Alucard from all sides. Ebisu turned around and remarked as he saw his opponent burned alive. He started to say, "Well done team, now let's return to base 2, but was cut off by voices of laughter. "What the?" He turned around, but a red blur punched him. Ebisu crashed through one tree and slammed into the next. His spine was damaged, so he was unable to move, but when he looked up, he was shocked to see that it was Alucard, with visible embers on his coat. "How?" When he asked, Alucard simply gave him a look and replied. How did I get away from your tiny seals, or how did I make it through the fire?" Alucard merely grinned and said, "The seal." Ebisu's eyes simply widened as he said, "I'm just strong to lift the extra weight due to the seal." "Why didn't you kill me, given your strength?" Alucard's eyes gleamed with pleasure and insanity, and his smirk only got bigger. He turned around and approached the three people conversing, saying, "I still have some use for you, now to deal with the small ones." A distressed Moegi said, "Konohamaru-kun, our plan didn't work. And now that Ebisu-sensei has lost, what should we do?" Udon was added. They both turned to watch Konohamaru, who was engaged in an internal argument. He glanced at Alucard before turning to face his teammates and uttering the following. He said, "Guys, we have to use that jutsu." The other two members appeared taken aback. Even if he succeeded, Despite having to swallow a bad pill, Konohamaru eventually swallowed and said. With determined expressions on their faces, Moegi and Udon nodded to Konohamaru and said, "It's the only way we can survive, so unless you have another plan we will have to stick to this one." The three then turned to face Alucard, who was approaching them slowly, and began to build up chakra before yelling. Amazing jutsu! Alucard showed no signs of stopping, and when he was in front of the trio, he flashed his razor sharp teeth, causing the trio to transform back and huddle together in fear. Konohamaru then asked. The trio each changed into a well-endowed female, naked, with their private parts covered by a wisp of smoke. How were you able to withstand this jutsu? No one ever did. Alucard merely chuckled before responding with a query. I am the creator and inventor of that technique, so why didn't it work on me? Then Moegi responded. No, that isn't possible. Its creator passed away 3 years ago. Alucard simply began to change into Naruto after grinning maniacally. Then, in his old voice, he said. Moegi, Udon, and even Ebisu were so taken aback by this realization that they were unable to respond. If you want the title of Hokage, you will have to beat me first. When Konohamaru saw him repeating those words, he appeared shocked. To his surprise, the image of Naruto remained in place despite his repeated attempts to dispel the genjutsu. It must be a genjutsu, it must. You're dead, he said, making a hand sign. How is this possible? You're supposed to be dead. He changed back and drew his gun, positioned it in front of Moegi's mouth, and fired, saying, I am dead, and you will be soon. The two other members of the squad were covered in blood. Then he approached Ebisu slowly. Alucard simply laughed when he said, You will not get away with this, Konoha will have your head for this. He then bit Ebisu in the neck and began sucking Ebisu's blood from his neck, saying, Let them try, many have tried it, it will be a glorious fight. I will crush them. Then Alucard tossed Ebisu's body aside. After witnessing the death of his sensei, Konohamaru awoke and yelled. He proceeded to make hand gestures before yelling, You monster, you killed them both. I will kill you. He uttered the words, Fire style, double fire dragon missile. 2 dragons emerged from his mouth and went after Alucard. The 2 dragons then swallowed Alucard. Although Konohamaru was relieved that Alucard was no longer alive, he was shocked to find that he was still alive. Then Alucard lunged forward and sank his teeth into his neck. At once, Konoha was dead. Alucard then began to drink from Konohamaru's corpse as he made his way towards Udon. Udon fled in terror from Alucard. The body of Konohamaru was dropped from Alucard's mouth as he exclaimed, Monster, get away from me. People keep telling me that, and what makes that you standing against me? A man, a dog, a monster, or even worse, a coward? Udon's gaze widened. He said venomously, Yes, I know, at one point during your sealing training you realized that it was possible to stop a Biju's intent once he was sealed, and you also realized that I wasn't a Kyuubi, but you didn't tell anyone of this revelation. You didn't even tell your best friends out of fear. You're nothing but a sniveling coward, you're the lowest of the low, you don't deserve to live. A moment later, he bit Udon severely in the neck and began sucking his blood. He let the corpse fall to the ground after he had had enough. Alucard was unaware of the sudden rustle coming from the bushes. Ebisu's body emerged from the bushes, but he didn't look the same. His eyes were red with a purple glow, and his skin had turned purple and some parts were already gone. He turned into a ghoul. The corpse of Konohamaru then began to rise, and shortly after that, the corpse of Udon did as well. Alucard simply approached Wave and uttered, Ghouls, follow me, we have a country to conquer. The newly renamed Great Uchiha Bridge was being guarded by the 2 eternal Chunin, Azumo and Katetsu, on a foggy morning in Wave. The bridge was also decorated with Konoha flags and the Konoha clans, particularly the Uchiha clan. A wooden gate at the end of the bridge was closed at the moment. Indifferently, the 2 Chunin were bored. And here I thought that conquering a nation would be at least a bit more fun. Azumo, wanna play a game? When Katetsu asked, Alright. What game should we play? Both of them considered it, but before they could think of anything, a smooth sound came from the fog. Before they could respond, Kanai attacked them, striking Azumo in the shoulder and Katetsu in the stomach. What about catch? The others simply missed. Then they both looked up to see Alucard approaching them without his glasses or hat. It seems that my ghouls can't throw that well, but still enough for the task at hand. And what about you two? You were supposed to catch them. Weren't you interested in playing? The 2 Chunin gasped when they recognized the 3 figures they saw through the fog. And here I brought you some playmates for you. Those are, Katetsu uttered, Konohamaru, Udon, and Ebisu. Do you not feel pleased to see them? The two gazed at Alucard with fear, rage, and hatred as he asked in a humorous tone. What did you do with them, you bastard? Alucard said just now. They were both shocked to learn, but Azuma recovered first. They thought they could stop me. They lost, so they are my obedient slaves, and so will you. Alucard merely chuckled and said, we will never submit. He then opened his mouth, revealing his razor, sharp teeth, and bit down on Azuma, who screamed, saying, you don't have to. Azuma, Katetsu yelled, extracted a scroll, and then a puff of smoke and a mace appeared. He leapt into the air and swung his mace downward, destroying the ground with the force of the smash and sending dust flying. Katetsu stared at the cloud, his mace still in place. I'm sorry, Azuma, but I knew you were beyond saving the moment he bit you, and I will make sure you are honored. That bastard is dead, he took my mace head on. When the dust cloud dispersed, Katetsu was met with a scene he had not anticipated. Alucard stood in a small crater, still sucking Azuma's blood, his bleeding hand holding the mace back from destroying him and his victim. Alucard then got to his feet, lifting the mace into the air, forcing Katetsu to release it, which he threw away, and he pulled out a single-edged, oversized, curved kunai, which he took out before he was about to strike him down. I caught you. With that, Alucard bit down on his trapped opponent. He screamed before he went down. Alucard then walked towards the gate and kicked it. The gate broke down under the power of the kick and flew open, revealing the capital of Wave, the only place worth conquering in Wave. Free of the tyrant Gato, it had the resources to grow, so in 3 years it tripled in size. What once were buildings of wood are now buildings made of stone. The streets were also made of stone instead of the mud and dirt it once was. At the sides of the streets were lanterns illuminating the city at night. At the center was an enormous bazaar. Around the capital was a wall protecting the village from bandits or other attackers. Alucard's vampiric eyes even determined an old-fashioned theater in the same style as one out of London in the 16th century on the other side of the city behind the wall. At another edge of the capital you could find a large haven. The only thing that was missing were people. There wasn't a single person in the vicinity. Alucard extended his senses and found a mass of people at the bazaar and few people scattered around the city in groups of 4. It appears that people are congregating, which facilitates fighting. One of you will stand watch here, ghouls. The other half will go right, and you will go left. Kill everyone who is wearing a forehead protector, and they will all become ghouls. That portion of the city's edge will be guarded by half of the ghouls that have been transformed. Wait for fresh orders when the groups arrive at one another. The ghouls then began to disperse and march in their separate directions, and Alucard began to make his way towards the bazaar as the glow in his eyes briefly grew brighter. In the meantime, Tenten, Neji, Lee, and Shikamaru, the invasion force commanders, were waiting in the city hall for their speech to the people wave. They all succeeded in becoming Chunin, and Neji even became a Junin. They only changed their appearance and grew older over the years. Shippuden, Lee was restless as usual. Yash, those unyouthful demon worshippers have been vanquished. Tenten, irritated by Lee's antics, sighed and punched him in the head. Now we just need to introduce the new youthful rules. If I can't do, I will run 100 laps around Wave on one hand. If I can't do that, I will. Lee, calm down. We will make sure that they don't even mention its name. Troublesome. Luckily was the invasion itself very simple. We just had to bribe their guards and mobilize our own troops. Everything went according to plan, said Shikamaru. You're correct, Nara.san. Destiny had decreed our victory. Neji, who has since retreated into his fateful business following the execution, said, even so, I have a disturbing feeling about this. Tenten sighed once more and said, you're thinking too much about it, Neji. Everything is fine. When Neji started to say, you're probably, a call from one of the guards over the radio system cut him off. Alpha 1, Command Center. We're being attacked. Do you hear me? The guard said in distress, we're under attack. You could hear screams and jutsu being thrown in the background. Who is attacking this command center, Alpha 1, and how many people are involved? Shikamaru asked. There is only one, but he is a monster, and he is destroying us. Alucard's sucking of the ninja's blood was very audible to the commanders, as was the blood squirting out of the man's body. What's going on, Neji? Neji turned on his Byakugan and conducted a thorough search of the capital after Shikamaru asked him to assume his commander's role. I'm working on it already. The enemy appears to be not alone. He has an invasion force that patrols the city's perimeter. They appear to be traveling steadily. In an attempt to contain us, they also leave 2 men on guard at strategic posts. However, their chakra is peculiar because it is no longer flowing through coils. Instead, it seems as though their chakra is housed within their bodies and is raging there. Is there anything you can use to identify them? Shikamaru asked. Yes, they were wearing protectors for their foreheads, and they're from. No, that can't be. Neji was usually calm and unfazed, so the three of them were a little taken aback. If Neji reacted this way, there must be a major issue. Neji, what is it? Tenten asked. They're shinobi from Konoha. Lee was the first to recover, and they all fell silent when Neji said, they even wear our flak jacket. They were all curious about what was happening. Why would those shinobi who aren't young turn on us? At that moment, Shikamaru said. No, Lee, I don't believe so. It's most likely a poison or a virus. It is how the enemy turns our shinobi against us. What about the team that was under attack, Neji? It is you say, they've been infected as well. Is anyone in the area? No, I can't find. Wait, no, that can't be right. What's wrong? Shikamaru asked. Our adversary appears to be a tall, chakra deficient man. He appears to be walking to a different squad. Does he resemble Lee or is he a civilian? Tenten asked. No, it isn't. They all have chakra. Even animals possess chakra. Civilians and Lee simply have too little or unable to use it. Shikamaru wondered about the tall stranger's mystery. So who is he, and how is he able to cause such mayhem? I'm not sure why this has never occurred before. He ought to be dead by all means. Lee was about to speed off when Shikamaru grabbed him by the shoulder and said, Yash, I'm going to challenge this unyouthful enemy to a youthful battle. He then grabbed a microphone and connected to all of the shinobi in wave, saying, No, whoever he is, he defeated 4 Chunin in a flash, we will have to ambush him, how troublesome. The enemy is a single man, but he uses a virus to turn our own forces against us. Shinobi, take note. We are under attack. Every shinobi returns to the bazaar, with the exception of those on the outskirts of the city. Infected shinobi are pushed back by those on the edge as they move around the edge to the gate. If you can't kill them, capture them. We must keep the civilians alive in City Hall. Otherwise, we risk an international catastrophe. Alucard, meanwhile, was enjoying his undead life. He simply killed the previous group in a gory manner and transformed them into ghouls, ordering them to move to the edge as reinforcements before moving on to the next group. The squad was made up of 3 males and a female, and the female had brown hair in a long ponytail that reached her neck, a katana by her side, a bald man with a brown mustache and a scar at its left eye, and a black one with a goatee. All 4 were dressed in the standard Chunin uniform, and the female was reportedly receiving a message through a headset when one of the males noticed Alucard. Hey, why are you in this place? The bazaar is where everyone is expected to be. The woman then said, Go now. That is probably the intruder. Who's this intruder? The bald one was asked. He is encroaching on us. He turns our people against us by infecting them with a virus. The brown-haired one simply snorted and said, Be careful. Oh, we have the advantage, it's 4 on 1. He then charged Alucard with his katana, attempting to cut him diagonally, but just before he could strike, Alucard grabbed the katana with his left hand and bit down on the poor shinobi. The other 3 looked horrified at how he sucked the blood out of his victim, and when he had enough, he dropped the shinobi on the ground and approached the trio, with only his mouth visible and blood dripping from his teeth. The trio then got ready for battle, with the bald one flashing through hand signs and yelling. Earth style. Earth spears. A series of stone spears were hurled at Alucard, who simply sped up and deftly avoided each one before the female sped through hand signs. Fire style. Firewall. She then erupted a wall of flames a few feet away from her, and Alucard simply charged through her flame wall, biting the goateed shinobi in the neck before swung the shinobi in a horizontal arc and stunning the other 2. He dropped the shinobi and then quickly bit down on the last male. The female simply crawled away from the man who had massacred her squad, and with his eyes glowing red, Alucard approached her slowly, took her neck in his gloved hand, tilted her in the air, and then licked some blood that had leaked from the corner of her mouth from her most recent blow. A virgin, lucky me, I'm going to enjoy this. The woman's eyes widened and her cheeks flushed slightly before she spoke in a terrified but surprisingly lustful tone. Are you planning to rape me? Alucard simply laughed. Why would I act in that way? The female spit out blood after he pierced her breast with his hand and struck her lung. Alucard dropped her on the street and got down on his hands and knees, then began using his tongue to mop up the blood that spilled onto the paved street. The kunoichi was still alive, but based on her sounds, it was obvious that she was in pain. Alucard ignored the ghouls who were waiting for orders and simply kept mopping up the blood. What did you see, Neji? They were standing in a bizarre street, which normally had shops, but today there were none, giving them the extra room they needed for combat. 15 shinobi stood guard around them, and Shikamaru asked who had already set up the ambush. He seems to have improved durability, strength, and speed. He has incredibly unconventional taijutsu. Neji, what do you mean by unorthodox? Shikamaru asked. The three were clearly taken aback by the savagery of their adversary. Lee then remarked. He bit down on the neck of his opponent and swung him against his other opponent. How unyouthful. It's not everything. Neji added. He also has a taste for female virgins and is a cannibal. This was the most unsettling piece of information they received, and Shikamaru, Lee, and Tenten all turned a little green. Tenten's face flushed with rage when she understood the female virgin remark. What? Tenten growled and yelled. What an unyouthful behavior. Yes, he did lick some of the female's blood. After concluding that she was a virgin, he declared himself fortunate and said he would enjoy it. Was she raped by him? The others didn't blame her. Even the most seasoned kunoichi were afraid of being raped. Tenten asked in distress. No, he began to lap up her blood after piercing her chest with his hand. By the way, he's still doing it. Given the amount of blood lost, the female is still alive but not for long. With pity for the fallen woman, Tenten growled, I'm going to kill that bastard. Lee then put his hand on her shoulder. We will, Tenten.san. He usually yelled about youth and other things, but even he understood that this was not the right time. After a while, there was a pause, which Shikamaru eventually broke. How's the fighting on the periphery? Ghoul perspective. We've done a good job of following the master's orders, and now that we're in a group of 8, we're on our way to the next group when I see a forehead protector and I throw some shurikens at it. I miss, and the others do the same. Some of the shurikens hit the men with the forehead protector, and they all slump down, dead. I start walking towards them, and when I reach one of them, I take a piece of him and begin to eat it, and others follow suit. The dead men then begin to transform into one of us, master's servants, with 2 of us remaining, and the rest of us going around the edge of the town, turning them into master's servants. This time, we threw kunai at them, but a wall of stone rose, and the kunai struck the wall, obstructing our path. One of us reaches the wall and begins tossing, but the wall remains. We continued to charge the people wearing the forehead protectors, and one of the men leapt in the air over the wall and threw a ball of fire at us as he said, Earth style. Earth spikes. Suddenly, spikes appeared on the wall, and the person punching the wall was struck in the heart by the spikes and died. Fire style great fireball. Nearly all of us are dead, and then all of us are suddenly being struck in the brain by stone spears that are being pierced through the ground. I'm afraid I can't go on, master. Thank you, I'm free. End. It appears that the opposition killed the infected because their metamorphosis rendered them incapable of using chakra. Neji Shikamaru reported, it also released their speed and intelligence. He then sent his troops to clear the rest of the city. He sent them to their doom, but why? He was aware that our defenses were stronger than theirs. What did he intend to achieve with them? As Tenten considered methods to dismember Alucard, Shikamaru gave her the solution. He most likely believed that we were incapable of defending ourselves against our own men. Additionally, it would discourage our own troops. Or I just didn't care what would happen to them. Emerged from an alley. The ninja turned to face the alley, and 2 blood-red eyes appeared there. Alucard then emerged from the alley and introduced himself to the ninja, and Shikamaru moved forward to speak to the elderly vampire. What do you stand to gain from this, and who are you? Alucard simply grinned amusingly. I'm Alucard and I'm going to liberate Wave. You have very little chance. Alucard simply kept grinning, which shocked most shinobi but infuriated Tenten. You're seriously outnumbered. What's causing your grin? You are a bloodsucking jerk. Shikamaru simply sighed and said, I'm just pleased that's all. I'm going to have a great fight, so come, attack me. How annoying. With that, a number of shinobi emerged from the buildings on the street and threw kunai at Alucard, most of whom missed him and the others he avoided. The whole area surrounding Alucard was crowded with kunai, and all of them suddenly began to fizzle, revealing that they all had explosive tags. Alucard leapt into the air to avoid the explosion, and 2 smoke. Spiraling dragons emerged from the dust cloud, followed by 2 unfolded scrolls that were still spinning in midair, with Tenten in the center. Twin Rising Dragon. She then proceeded to unseal weapons from her scrolls, including swords and kunai, and threw them at Alucard, who retaliated by drawing his jackal and castle and shooting each one, rendering them ineffective. Tenten then fell to the ground, followed by Alucard, who was about to aim at him but was stopped by something. He looked at the ground and noticed a shadow connecting to his shadow, realizing that Shikamaru had captured that. The dust then cleared, revealing Shikamaru holding his hands in the rat sign. Shadow impersonation. Neji now, success. After that, Neji charged Alucard. 8 trigrams. Vacuum palm. He then blasted Alucard with a palm strike, sending him flying in the direction of Lee, who was waiting for him. Lee then launched a series of punches and kicks, culminating in an upward kick that sent Alucard flying, and Lee briefly vanished before resurfacing behind Alucard. Leaf Shadow Dance. As the bandages on Lee's arm began to come loose, Alucard became mummified. Lee then seized the mummified Alucard and began to spiral downward while nose first. Primary Lotus. Tenten then leapt into the air and, as she was above the dust cloud, she opened a sealing scroll, which released a dozen weapons aimed at the dust cloud. The shinobi then cheered, the commanders relieved, but were stopped by a voice from the dust cloud. Lee had just been about to crash when he ejected, leaving Alucard to crash on the ground, creating a dust cloud. That was a very good try, but it will take then a few punches and weapon to kill me. 2 red eyes emerged from the dust cloud, and when it was gone, they saw Alucard standing with multiple weapons protruding from his body, one of which sliced open his left cheek, exposing his sharp teeth to the world. The weapons were gradually pushed back out of his body, and his cheek was also being repaired. Alucard then began shooting shinobi, and while the more experienced shinobi barely escaped the bullets, but a second one followed, killing them. The commanders simply stared in horror at the carnage, and none of their men were spared. Shikamaru was the first to come out of it. Shikamaru began his thinking pose, saying, "Neji, Tenten, Lee, keep him busy, I need some time to think up a plan." Team 9 awoke from their daze and then got ready for their next move. Tenten threw a huge scroll over Alucard, and the scroll began to shoot weapons at him so quickly that they turned into white streaks. Weapon control. Heavenly Metal Disaster. Alucard simply replied by pointing his guns at the sky and firing. While most of the weapons were hit, some managed to get through, striking Alucard in the arms and shoulders. Ignoring this, Alucard kept shooting. When the outburst was over, he pointed his weapons at Tenten and began firing. Neji immediately moved in front of her and began to spin. 8 trigrams. Rotation. After Lee had opened 3 of his inner gates, a dome of chakra materialized to block the bullets from striking Tenten. Lee then charged Alucard, who swung his jackal at him but Lee ducked. Alucard grinned slyly before being kicked in the face, which sent him flying upwards, and then he was flung around like a rag doll by a barrage of punches before Lee was ready to punch him downward. 4th gate. Open. He then briefly vanished and punched him in the lower body. Alucard launched himself toward the ground like a rocket, but Lee's bandage, which was ready for a kick and palm strike at the same time, pulled him up. 5th gate. Open, reverse lotus. Alucard was then struck by the attack and smashed into the ground. Team 9 anxiously awaited the dust to clear, which revealed Alucard to be unharmed. He then fired at Lee, but Neji again stopped him with rotation. Tenten, what is that weapon? Lee was asked if he was recovering from using the gates. I don't know, Lee, I haven't seen anything like it. It's a miniature kunai launcher that can launch metal objects quickly, Neji said, and Tenten inquired. Are there any weaknesses that you see? Neji pulled out a kunai and was about to charge, but Shikamaru stopped him by putting his hand on his shoulder. Nothing, I can't think, we just have to wait till he runs out. Neji, stop it, I will take over, take a break you 3. Are you crazy, Shikamaru? You will be facing him alone, and the 3 of us couldn't defeat him. Have you made a wish to die? Tenten shouted out. Tenten is right, Shikamaru-san, we will have to combine our youthfulness, Lee agreed. Shikamaru replied, an army needs a commander to function properly, but the soldiers will have to listen to the commander to make him useful. Neji sheathed his kunai and retreated a few steps before Tenten called out to him. What are you doing, Neji? Has fate declared him victorious? Tenten started to respond, but she changed her mind and stepped back a few steps. Lee then followed, and Shikamaru approached Alucard, who was waiting for him. So the commander goes to battle, this will be interesting. Shikamaru was focused, and Alucard was grinning maniacally. The 2 of them remained motionless for several minutes, their hair blowing in the wind, until Alucard suddenly leapt backwards, just in time, as a tendril made of shadow emerged from the ground. The Chunin rolled away, revealing small holes in the streets where his feet were. Alucard then had to dodge several tendrils that were emerging from the streets, and after a while they ceased appearing. Shikamaru appeared, slashed with his tanto, and Alucard blocked with his castle. When Shikamaru leapt away, he realized his ruse and glanced at the ground. He saw that his shadow was linked to Shikamaru's. With serious force, Shikamaru said, "Shadow mimic technique. Success." Alucard merely grinned. "It's impressive that you used the entire show to divert my attention, but now that you have me, what will you do?" "This." He then positioned his arm so that Alucard could shoot himself, but Alucard simply kept grinning, obviously amused. "Oh, so you intend to make me shoot myself? How can you be certain it will work? I watched every move you made when you were battling Team 9. However, I was able to locate one of the weapons you threw at them when Neji blocked it. Even though it was made of silver, why would you throw something so valuable?" Shikamaru explained. "I therefore developed a theory. You use silver in case you would come across something like yourself." "What if you're mistaken?" questioned Alucard with a crazy smile. Shikamaru then made Alucard pull the trigger, expecting a shower of blood, but instead a cloud of dust descended from the nearby building. "Then I have blown up your head. I doubt you would survive that." Shikamaru noticed that Alucard had shifted his head forward when he appeared better. "How?" Alucard simply grinned maniacally. He then fired with his jackal, saying, "Your foolish shadow just couldn't hold me, but nice try." The bullets were stopped by a broadsword, which was Kabikirabocho. Tenten held the sword, and the force of the bullets caused the blade to crack. Alucard's mood instantly fell when he saw Kabikirabocho, a broadsword that resembled an oversized butcher knife with a hole at the top and a half one at the bottom. Alucard's dissatisfaction was evident as he said, "That sword doesn't belong to you." "I found it, so it's mine. It's not my fault no one bothered to take it," replied Tenten. "The sword of a man shouldn't be in the hands of a dog." She reacted somewhat angrily to being likened to a dog, saying, "Shut up, I'm worthy of this blade." Then fix the blade immediately to demonstrate it. Tenten was taken aback when the vampire gave a firm command. Alucard picked up Kubikiribocho and placed it in a puddle of blood, created by a dead shinobi. "But I don't have the tools right now." She was then struck in the stomach so quickly that she was unable to react, losing her grip on the sword due to the shock. Tenten was blown several feet away, and the punch broke several of her ribs, immobilizing her for a few moments. Tenten watched in wonder as the sword restored its former glory. "You fool, this sword doesn't repair by normal means. You have to feed it." The blood in the puddle began to vanish, and the cracks in the sword began to mend. Alucard to the downed Tenten. Alucard raised his arm and said, "You're obviously not worthy of this sword. You couldn't hear its cries for blood." Then he began to swing down, saying, "Now time to die." Clang. 10 kunai then blocked the Kabikirabocho, and 10 chunin held the kunai. Lee, who had recovered from using the gates, picked up Tenten just in time, as the kunai began to crack under the force of Kabikirabocho. The chunin then leapt away, leaving the sword to crash into the street. One of the chunin then spoke to Shikamaru and Team 9. "The infected men have been sent out. Commanders, flee immediately." This surprised the commanders, particularly Shikamaru. "How are you able to ask us this? We are this squad's commanders. We don't have any information about the enemy. Only you four do, so someone needs to report back to Konoha." The 4 shinobi struggled to comprehend, but eventually they left with Tenten on Lee's back. "You're more valuable," Alucard said to the shinobi. "Are you aware that you will die?" "Yes, but we will do so battling," one of the chunin replied, and Alucard simply grinned eerily. Then he charged the shinobi, saying, "Well said, dog." Tenten was the first to react as the Wave Invasion Force commanders were running back to Konoha when they heard screaming halfway to the bridge. When they turned around, they saw a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The 10 chunin that were supposed to cover them were falling from the sky, screaming and kicking as they fell, each of them hitting a flagpole on the bridge and impaling them. Some of the chunin were still alive, which made their suffering even worse. "How awful. Does his brutality know no bounds?" Then Shikamaru stated. "Konoha's invasion of Wave came to an end when they said, 'We will have revenge, I will make sure of it, but we will have to retreat for now.'" Alucard was standing in front of the city hall where the Wave residents lived, but before he could open the door, it was pushed open. It was just a chink, but Alucard could see the numerous people trying to look through it, and they wanted to close the door and hide when they saw that Alucard had put on his glasses and hat, but they were stopped by a loud voice. "What are you doing? You idiots! How would you thank the man who rescued us from those Konoha ninja?" Through the man's words, the crowd felt ashamed of their own actions. Alucard recognized the stranger right away. He was Tazuna, who hadn't changed much. Tazuna then turned to face him. "Hello, I'm Tazuna, and I'm this city's major." Tazuna then waited for a name, which Alucard provided, and said, "And in the name of the city I want to thank you. Alucard. Alucard.san, if there is anything we can do for you, just call us. A place to live in here would be nice, permanently I mean." The people of Wave were moved by the request's simplicity. Rather than just a roof over their heads, the majority of them would demand a monument, a lot of money, and/or power. "You can stay at my house in the interim while we make arrangements for that, but it will take some time. My daughter Tsunami will lead you there." Tsunami then approached him with Inari, who hasn't changed much either. Inari, on the other hand, had grown well. He was a little taller and had let his spiky black hair grow out. He was dressed in a gray, sleeveless, V-neck shirt and black pants. Although people would not notice it, Alucard could tell that Inari had trained for battle because of his muscularity and gait. They left after saying, "Please, follow me, Alucard.san. Inari, come here." During their departure, the crowd gathered around Tizuna, who then spoke to the residents of his city. "Hey everyone, a significant portion of our city was destroyed in the battle with the Konoha ninja. However, we can fix it if we cooperate. However, that is not the only problem. Our Daimyo and his family were about to be replaced when they were killed by Konoha Shinobi. He needs to be replaced, and I'm not going to do it myself. Who will you pick, then?" One of the citizens came up with an idea. The Wave people needed someone who could be a Daimyo, someone who was assertive and exuded authority, but even though they made good process, most of them were still a little meek because of Gato. The others were merchants, and they couldn't rule even if it meant saving their lives. "What about Alucard, the person who saved us?" This sparked a flurry of responses. "What? He just arrived here, isn't that a little too soon? He did save us, so I wouldn't mind. Well, why not? We have no one better to do it." Tizuna was a little irritated by the noise and said, "I doubt he knows about our values and such. Remain quiet. I don't mind him being our daimyo because we don't have a better option, but for those who aren't sure, I will serve as his advisor for the first few years to ensure that our customs and values are understood. What say you?" Tizuna was relieved that they now had a daimyo and that he wasn't the one, and the people agreed after feeling somewhat reassured that he would serve as advisor. "So it's agreed, then we will ask Alucard to become our daimyo." He was taking a big risk by not taking control of Wave, but he knew that in order to win this battle he had to play his cards at the right time. If he took control of Wave by force, he would only gain hostility. However, if he could gain control through approval, he would win a base of operation, a source of income, and the favor of other nations. Tsunami shot him out of his reverie as he was walking a little away from Inari, who was talking excitedly to Alucard. Tsunami then asked, "Alucard.san, we have arrived at the house." He walked inside the house, which was a different location from the previous one and was one of the larger buildings in the city. To his surprise, the interior was not much different from the past. It was straightforward and functional but still had a cozy feel. Alucard didn't mind napping because he had overindulged and had nothing better to do. "Would you like sleep? You must be tired." She then led him to the guest room, which was a plain room with a bed, a dresser, and a desk and chair. It had a window that provided a wonderful view of the city, especially at night. Alucard removed his glasses and hat and set them on the dresser before turning to face the bed. "I wouldn't mind." Tsunami then inquired, "It's been so long since I've slept on a bed. In what way did you sleep?" Although he was unsure, Alucard ultimately responded to the question. "A coffin." Tsunami was obviously taken aback by the strange revelation, but she gave it some more thought. "Well, they appear to be at ease. The only issue would be if a body were inside. Was it inhabited?" Tsunami was somewhat reassured, but she still thought the idea was a little morbid. "No, it is mine and mine alone. It is my most prized possession." She departed after saying, "Call me if you need me. I will probably be downstairs." He was going to lay down on the bed when he realized he was still holding Kabikirabocho, so he removed it from his back and put it in a corner. After saying, "I'll bring it back tomorrow," Alucard settled down on the bed, which was just the right length for him, and quickly fell asleep. The members of said group used the projection communication system to communicate in a number of the Akatsuki hideouts. "Report, Zetsu. Why did you call us together? What is so important?" asked Pain, the ring-eyed leader. The man with the silver hair and the scythe complained, "Yeah, I was busy with my prayers for Lord Jashin." He started to say, "It's Wave, it was being conquered by," but Kakuzu cut him off. "Konoha, yes we know, what a bother, I could be hunting bounties and earning money now." Conan then responded. Let him continue, he wouldn't comment him for such trivial thing. They did for a moment, but it was then conquered again, but this time by Alucard. The Akatsuki members were taken aback. Even after battling two S-rank ninjas, they had to recuperate, but he went straight to wave at high speed and wiped them out. How many and what kind of men did Konoha have there? Asked Zetsu, Itachi. A small 100 of Chunin level. The spiral. Masked Man commented, does that Alucard even sleep? Even Toby, who is a big boy, needs sleep. Kisame only noticed a smile. I would love to battle him, it would be such a fun fight. Be careful, Kisame. He is, as far as we can tell, your worst option. He prefers to strike from a distance but doesn't employ chakra, Itachi commented. The leader was asked, did you notice anything new about him? No, I couldn't come to close, otherwise would I be found. Pain communicated his orders after processing the information. All right, the plan is still in place. Kisame and Toby will hunt the Sanbi, while Kakuzu and Hidan will pursue the Nibi. Itachi will attempt to save Sasori's spy network in the interim. Kisame then exited the projection communication system, saying, Toby, follow me. Toby is a good boy. I will have to keep an eye out for Alucard, even though he could ruin my plans. Toby and the others exited the projection communication system. Tazuna was walking toward Alucard as the Akatsuki members were talking about their plans. He knocked on the door of the guest room, but no sound came from the room, and when he opened it, he saw Alucard sleeping on the bed. This was quite unexpected because he had witnessed what Alucard did, and although he did not like it, he knew that it was necessary, even though he could have been less cruel. As Tazuna was reliving the scenes he had to visit as a major, Tsunami went by him. Then Tazuna looked at the sleeping man, who appeared to be dreaming, and shrugged before going downstairs to wait and sip sake. Oh, he fell immediately asleep when he placed himself, though he first looked irritated, but when I closed the curtains he slept a lot better. Alucard's fantasy realm. Once more standing in a dream world, Alucard pulled out his jackal to shoot any idiot who happened to cross his path. The Demon of the Mist, who hasn't changed much since they first met, turned around and confronted Alucard, who was a little taller than him. You Gaki are the most crazy person I ever met. Alucard was undoubtedly shocked to hear that voice, so shocked that he didn't shoot. Zabuza, could you please explain why I should leave this dream? Because I'm not a fabrication of your fantasy, but I'm the soul that's stored inside Kabikirabocho. Alucard said, I see, so the sword is even more like than I thought. You could say that. After that, Alucard had to make Zabuza dodge multiple bullets. What are you doing, Gaki? Zabuza said angrily as he continued to dodge and block bullets. You are obviously a dream, you wouldn't recognize yourself in real life. To Zabuza's relief, Alucard ceased shooting and said, you are wrong. You see, when someone wants to wield Kabikirabocho, it takes a bit of blood, and through it, the previous wielder that's stored inside it can judge the person. Zabuza was quite irate and said, I see. Gaki, you won't even say you're sorry for trying to kill me? Alucard merely grinned. That's right. The two warriors were silent for a moment before Zabuza burst out laughing. That's the spirit, indeed. It's precisely what I hope the next Kabikirabocho owner will have. I'm grateful, Zabuza. By the way, what made you choose to accept or reject Tenten? You mean the person who stole the sword? Insufficient food was given to the sword to initiate the ceremony. Regarding those memories, do you know how long I've been watching them and why you had to have so many of them? I had to watch every single one of your memories, as well as every single memory you've ever gotten. It's been 300 million years. I've had the one with 300 million years of watch time, while all the others had only at most 20 years. I believed I had gone to hell. Alucard shot at him while he was taking a break from his tirade. Is that all? Alucard then exited the dream world after saying, yes, make sure to be a worthy owner of Kabikirabocho. Kakashi was the first to speak as the members of Team 7 stood in front of Senju Tsunade, their Hokage, in Konohagakure. Tsunade stayed calm as she said, Team 7, coming back from a successful S-rank mission. Report. Our contractor Tamari was chatting with a man we later identified as Alucard when we got to Suna. We chose to get in touch with the client after they discussed the kidnapping of Gaara and the Akatsuki. Asuna.nin then arrived carrying the gourd belonging to the cage. Why would they bring his gourd? Curious, the fifth Hokage asked. Kakashi simply went on. Tsunade was disturbed by that piece because it made her think of Itachi and his crow genjutsu. Alucard took a sniff from the gourd. He commented on the smell in a positive way, and after that he disappeared in a colony of bats. Was it genjutsu or shunsen? We aren't sure, we couldn't sense any chakra. Continue. Tamari then led us to his brother, who reportedly had a run.in with one of the ninjas who had taken the cage. He ultimately lost and was returned, where it was determined that he had been seriously poisoned. He was cured by Sakura using Suna's greenhouse. Konkuro then disclosed that he had captured a piece of fabric from Sasori of the Red Sands, his opponent. A number of Suna shinobi followed us as I used my nindog to locate the cage. Among them were Tamari and Lady Chiyo. Tsunade's face lit up with nostalgia when she heard that name. Is Hag still alive, then? Her poisons were always so nasty, but I always managed to get rid of them. What took place next? Then, to Tsunade's alarm, Kakashi gave his neck a sheepish rub. Well, we found Gaara together with Alucard walking towards us. Tsunade's expression was one of disbelief upon hearing that information. What? You're implying that this Alucard guy used his gourd to locate the cage, sneaked into their base, rescued the cage, and eliminated the two Akatsuki members by himself? Kakashi recently stated. Tsunade said, yes, that would be correct. She then pulled out a bottle of sake and began to sip. Kakashi then began his description by saying, so tell me about this Alucard. Although he says he's not from Kiri, he is a tall, blank man with short black hair and teeth similar to those in Kiri. I've never seen him dress in such an odd way. Along with a hat of the same hue, he wore an ankle-length blood-red overcoat. He was dressed in a strange charcoal-colored jacket and pants. He was dressed in black boots and charcoal pants. He completed his appearance with blood-red ribbon around his neck, glowing orange glasses, and white gloves. She was shocked to learn that they had never heard of Alucard and would let Jiraiya learn more about him. That man would be simple to identify. However, how come you're late if you didn't? A group of Iwa missing.nin ambushed us. We have their heads in a scroll because we defeated them after being ambushed. After that, we had to rest. He threw the scroll in her direction, and she simply caught it and put it away for later. That would be all, dismissed. However, Team 9 and Shikamaru, who were obviously worn out and appeared to be struggling, barged through the door before Team 7 could depart. Tenten was the first to speak. Hokage. Sama. The news is not good. They were expected to be gone for at least another 2 weeks, so Tsunade was obviously taken aback to see them here. Why are you here, Shikamaru? Shocked, she said, and Shikamaru took it. We've lost Wave. What do you mean by this? You claim to have it. When Tsunade and Team 7 heard the name Alucard, they had a mini-stroke. We did, but we were defeated afterwards by a man named Alucard. Have you mentioned Alucard? Asked Tenten. Yes, do you know him? No, but he got in the way of one of our missions, so it appears we need to let the council and clan leaders know about this. You 9 will accompany me when Anbu goes to gather the clan heads and council members for a meeting. She rose from her seat and made her way to the council room, with the others trailing behind. The curtains were closed when Alucard awoke from his bizarre dream. Curious, I thought they were open. He glanced at Kabikirabocho and picked it up, noticing that a small amount of his blood was stored in the handle. Convinced that his dream was real, he put on his hat and glasses and went downstairs, where Tsunami met him. Dinner is ready. Alucard.san, just in time. Dad is at the table already. Alucard said, I'll get Inari. He then approached the table and sat down on the seat in front of Tazuna. Inari and Tsunami entered and sat down next to each other. Tsunami then went to the kitchen and returned with a pot, which would have made Alucard drool if he had been alive, but now it meant nothing. She then handed each person a plate, and the 3 of them placed their hands in a prayer, and Alucard followed suit. Itadakimasu. The 3 humans began to eat, and Tsunami noticed that Alucard was not eating. He was eating ramen, which used to make him go crazy when he was Naruto, but now that he was a vampire, he was unable to eat it because it not only tasted like shit but also made him throw up. Tazuna and Inari looked at Alucard and said, Alucard.san, is something wrong? We have something else if you don't like it. Alucard knew that things were going wrong, but he couldn't let the Wave people know that he drinks human blood because that would eliminate his chances of becoming Wave's ruler. No, there is no problem, it looks great. He grabbed his chopsticks, took a small portion of the ramen, and began chewing it. It tasted awful, but he kept chewing while he began to change his stomach and intestines into the puppy version of Baskerville. He then swallowed. Normally, he would throw up the food at that point, but because he had mastered his vampire powers, he was able to swallow it without any issues. Once the food left his gullet, it fell into Baskerville's mouth, and he began to eat it. How are the repairs going, Grandpa? Tazuna said, turning to face his daughter. We need to rebuild one street, but if we put in enough effort, we should be finished in a few days. It is primarily cleanup. We also restored our bridge to its former splendor. He chose to omit the graphic details so they wouldn't have to know. All right, Alucard.san. Where are you from? When Tsunami interrupted, Alucard was pleased because it gave him an excuse to stop consuming the repulsive food. I come from an island far away, named Great Britain. I'm not aware of it. What was the experience like there? Tizuna was asked, and after giving it some thought, Alucard responded. It is nice. So, what brought you here? Tsunami asked. A promise that I have yet to fulfill. What did you pledge? When Alucard stayed silent, he realized it wasn't a pleasant thought. Asked Inari excitedly, considering all the cool things it could be. After Tsunami reassured him, it is okay, you don't have to tell. The remainder of the meal was consumed in silence, and Alucard only finished one bowl before putting down his chopsticks to indicate that he was finished. He said, "Thank you, Baskerville." Baskerville gave him a silent bark in return, and Alucard let go of his hellhound. After taking the dishes, Tsunami went to the kitchen and returned with dessert. Anyone up for dessert? It's dango. Thank you, but no, I've had enough, Alucard said courteously. Are you certain? You haven't eaten much tonight, Tsunami inquired worriedly. Yes. All right, how about the two of you? Together, Inari and Tizuna said, yes. They were then given 2 plates of dango, and Tizuna took one. Tizuna then concluded that this was the appropriate moment. The Konoha killed our Daimyo, Alucard.san, because he refused to comply with their demands. We've looked for a replacement, and we hoped you'd be that person. Tsunami weren't shocked because they knew in advance, but they were staring at Alucard, who was obviously taken aback by this information because he assumed it would take some time to take over Wave. Why did they choose me? I just came here, was a common question, so Tizuna wasn't shocked. The majority of us are workers or merchants. We are not leaders. In order to make our values and traditions known, we also agreed that I would serve as your advisor. What do you think? Will you serve as our daimyo? Just one requirement. I shall be called Count, the ancient vampire said, and Inari inquired. What does Count mean? It is hard to explain, but I took a liking to it. The new wave daimyo then remarked, I guess that's acceptable, but I need to know your last name, Alucard.san. It's Chitsuki. My name is Alucard Chitsuki. The remainder of the evening was devoted to explaining to Alucard his responsibilities as determined by the household members. All of the clan heads, including Hamaru, Kaharu, and Danzo, were waiting in a small room for their Hokage, who entered with Shikamaru, Team 7, and Team 9. Hokage. Sama, why are we called here? Why are those shinobi here when it's already evening? Hamaru asked. The other council members followed suit, which ultimately infuriated Tsunade. Silence. We have some very unsettling news, so I've called a meeting. Our mission to rescue the Kazekage from the Akatsuki was the first step in the process. We dispatched Team 7 to the mission, but a man named Alucard saved him before they even arrived at the base. What is it? Even though they are S-rank nin, that doesn't mean they're invincible. It's just not possible. Hamaru said, but Shikaku Nara, the leader of the Nara clan, cut him off. I check the bingo book whenever a new one is released, and I haven't heard of him, so it's unsettling. As commander, it is my responsibility to stay informed about these kinds of issues, regardless of how problematic they may be. However, it is unusual and problematic for someone to defeat an S-class nin before he even appeared in the bingo book. This alerted everyone to the fact that he was unexpected and capable of fighting S-class nin. Tsunade was the first to recover. I see, continue. After that, Alucard trailed us back to Sanagakure. He didn't divulge any information despite our attempts to elicit it, Kakashi said. He then went to Wave and conquered, hence why Neji, Tenten, Lee and Shikamaru are here. They're the only survivors. Tsunade continued. However, he defeated all 90 of the Chunin level men we sent there, and a few days earlier, he had saved the Kazekage. Who is he? Everyone's attention was drawn to Danzo when he slammed his cane into the ground. He is a threat to our village, he should be put down, it's as simple as that. In an attempt to defuse the situation, Shuza said, we don't know what he can, but maybe could the two teams tell us what they know, starting with Team 7. Our knowledge of him is limited. We are aware that his sense of smell is superior to that of the Inuzuka, Sakura said. The head of the dog tamers, Sume Inuzuka, protested, what? Our clan members have the best smell of the whole elemental nations. He could track the Kazekage through his gourd, Sai replied. Sume was silent, and they were correct that she couldn't. Kakashi said, that gourd is filled with the blood of his victims. Even you can't track a person with that much different scents mixed in it. The survivors of Wave were taken aback when they learned that the only other skill that he showed was that he could do a bat Shunsen or he used a genjutsu. What? You can't do that, Tenten exclaimed. What are you saying? Inoichi, the Mindwalker, asked. All of the older shinobi were taken aback by this piece. Neji said, emotionless, that man has no chakra. Sakura said, what do you mean, no chakra? That is impossible. Neji simply shot back. I saw it with my Byakugan, that man has not a single drop of chakra. So, how did he fight, and is this the same man we're discussing? Kakshi was asked. He was a man with sharp teeth and black hair. He was dressed in black combat boots and a red overcoat. Is that your man? He was wearing an odd gray outfit underneath. Neji was asked. Yes. So, tell us, it's the same man. Tsunade demanded, Commander, give your report on how he invaded Wave. Start. Battle of the Wave synopsis. When we first saw a squad patrol call, one of the members on the call was obviously upset. After telling that man that he was a monster and alone, that man killed him. We discovered that Neji had turned our own men against us after he used his Byakugan. Use our own man against us? What do you mean? Heishi Hyuga inquired. He used a virus that infects people and turns them into his submissive slaves. In return, they lose the majority of their intelligence and skills. The virus can be passed from him to the shinobi and the zombies themselves. When the zombies tried to enclose us, I chose to send a message to the men who were on edge. We told the others to back off so we could surprise him. Before they could arrive at the ambush site, he arrived at another squad. The squad's first member pulled out his katana and charged at him. Alucard killed the man by catching his sword in mid-strike. He defeated two of the squad members who threw jutsu at him, then swung him like a club, striking the other two while biting down on the last member's neck. Then he murdered another member of the squad. The final female member was approached slowly by Alucard, who took her by the neck before Sume cut him off. Shikamaru went on, we know what happened, just skip it. After licking some of her blood, he concluded that she was a virgin. Then he struck her lung with his hand, impaling her. After letting her fall to the ground, he started licking the blood. Shikamaru was not dead yet, but not for long. The shinobi, particularly the women, stared at her in shock. Is that a new code or something? Did you just say that you licked the blood? Kaharu asked Shikamaru. Neji said, no, he literally licked her blood. Shikamaru went on. After he arrived at our location, we carried out our plan. Tenten threw a series of weapons at him after the majority of the shinobi threw exploding tag kunai at and around him, forcing him to jump in the air. He drew his own weapons, which were two mini kunai launches, and his accuracy ensured that none of her weapons got through. I used my shadow mimic jutsu to catch him as soon as he hit the ground. Then, Neji's vacuum palm struck Alucard. He was hurled at Lee, who performed a taijutsu combo that culminated in a primary lotus. Tenten sent a volley of weapons at him, ending the ambush. Sadly, he survived the bombardment, and it was at that point that he displayed a remarkable capacity for healing. It forced the weapons from his body, leaving him unharmed. Then he began tearing our men to shreds. Both Lee and Tenten gave him their best shot, but to no avail. I then devised a strategy, and by combining my shadow jutsu with my own, I was able to capture him and make him strike himself with his own weapon. He then demonstrated that, using only his physical strength, he could defeat my shadow mimic jutsu. He then used his weapon to throw two mini kunai, which Tenten was able to block with Kabikirabocho. He wasn't happy when he saw the weapon. By offering to fix the blade that his weapons had cracked, he demonstrated his claim that she wasn't deserving of the blade. When she was unable to do so, he struck her with such force that she dropped the blade. Then he lifted it and cut down. Fortunately, the 10 shinobi who were killing the zombies were responsible. So that we could report this, they begged us to go back to Konoha. After agreeing and backing off, we heard yelling as we approached the bridge. The 10 Chunin were plummeting from the sky. They all landed on a flagpole on the bridge, impaling the poor men, some of whom were still alive, and were all alive when they fell. Finish. Danzo admired Shikamaru, who was everything a shinobi should be. He would be a great ally, but it is unfortunate that they are opponents, and he will die now for the sake of Konoha. Everyone else, with the exception of Team 9 and Danzo, stared at Shikamaru in shock. He was ruthless, slaughtered their man, took no prisoners, showed no mercy, and even seemed to play with his opponents to prolong their suffering. Is your report that way? Tsunade asked before turning to Team 9. What else would you like to add? Then Neji said. Yes, he had blood-red eyes that glowed. The council as a whole then began exchanging words. It could be an experiment of Orochimaru, and the strange weapons also point in his direction, Hamaru replied. However, the final member of the Ino, Shika-Cho, addressed his son, saying, it could also be a scheme of Akatsuki. Kisame has superhuman strength, knows about the blades of the 7 swordsmen of the mist, and Itachi could back him up with a powerful genjutsu and some kunai. Son, why did you force him to hit himself with his own weapon? There were far more better options. Shikaku appeared contemplative for a while before saying, he shot many kunai made of silver. I thought that he used them in case he faces something like himself. I see. Sume commented, this points even more at Orochimaru. The Jiraiya, their spy master, spoke up from the corner of the room, saying, it isn't Orochimaru, it also isn't Akatsuki. Jiraiya, tell me about yourself and how long you've been here, Tsunade asked. Shortly. I've heard of Wave. Additionally, I learned that the Wave people want him to be their daimyo. It makes sense, but why can't it be Akatsuki or Orochimaru? Kaharu said, and Jiraiya gave the council an explanation. Orochimaru would wait for us to exhaust ourselves before striking, as he wouldn't dare to attack Akatsuki directly. Since Itachi and Kisame are both seen far away, Akatsuki cannot be the culprit. Alucard is a new threat, so I guess we should list him as an S-rank ninja in the bingo book. Tsunade concluded, but what should we call him? It should put him in a negative light. How about the blood? Drinking Alucard, Inoichi said. Shuza commented, no, I thought of Alucard the Crimson Menace. I considered, the Impaler of Wave, Sum's suggestion of the name was accepted by all. That one will do, so we will place him in the bingo book as, the Impaler of Wave. Alucard was now approaching Kiri in the Land of Water. Following his coronation, he designated Tazuna as his stand-in in case he was unable to perform his duties. Alucard reminded Tazuna that he shouldn't deny his count just as he was about to decline. Sending Gaara a mission request that included Wave's protection was the second thing he did as count. 2 days later, the eagle that Alucard had sent came back with an offer from Gaara. Gaara was so kind as to send him a couple of packs of blood. After reviewing the offer and checking it over, Alucard replied with a yes. 5 days later, Wave was guarded by 100 shinobi who were ranked off Junin and Chunin. In addition, he rode to Mifune, the ruler of Iron Country, where Wave had employed the samurai, requesting payment for the Sanagakure contract as well as a refund for the duration of the agreement between Iron Country and Wave. He argued that they were required to fulfill the remaining terms of the contract because they had not only failed to protect Wave. He added that if his samurai had been defeated by a stronger force, he and his people would have understood, but instead they betrayed Wave. Mifune replied that he was aware of the circumstances and that, since both demands were reasonable, he would abide by them. Although Alucard chose to make some changes to the palace, the money raised by this political maneuver was utilized to fund Wave's repairs, which included cleaning the daimyo's palace. He created a dungeon beneath his palace using some of his familiar memories. A trapdoor leads from his room to the dungeon. Tazuna sent him a notification during that period. Flashback. 10 days following the invasion, Alucard was seated at a desk in his study office. The design was straightforward. It included chairs, a desk, and a few bookcases. Additionally, the room featured a window that offered a stunning view of the ocean. He was examining various chakra restraining systems. The ones in Snow Country appear promising, but he had experience with them. If you have enough willpower, you could break them, though the Kyuubi might also be to blame. The others, like those chakra absorbing plants, were either too expensive or didn't suit his preferences. Then, Tazuna, who was waiting at the door, interrupted him as he was planning his free time. My lord, can I come in? Tazuna slid the door open and went in, saying, yes, you can. Alucard said without even looking up, Count, I have found something that would you be interested in. Continue. 2 weeks ago, the Chunin exams were started in Kiri. I see, but that is not the only thing, is it? No, every major hidden country has their most promising genin in the finals. Now every cage will come at those exams. This has never happened before. Kiri then has invited every daimyo and major clan for the Chunin exams and even organized a dancing event in the evening. It seems that our daimyo had accepted the invitation. He also arranged most of the journey. Alucard then rose from his seat. The ocean. So Kiri has made a major gamble. They are really desperate to prove that they are still a major nation after their civil war. Tazuna, I will go to the exams. I want you to prepare my journey. After saying, of course, my lord, Tazuna departed from his study. End flashback. After that, he found himself on a boat headed for water country. Aside from the suicide case, the trip was uneventful and dull. A man fell from the boat after cutting his throat. The man even apologized to his family in a letter, stating that he was unable to continue living. He left for Kiri as soon as he reached the port, and he is currently doing so. Even though it was misty, he was still able to use his vampire senses to find his way through the swamps that were typical of water country. He was proceeding smoothly until a big snake attacked him. Alucard simply used his castle to shoot it. With a poof, the snake vanished, and Alucard leapt away, narrowly avoiding a sword swing. With the sword of Kusanagi in his hand, the snake Sanin, Orochimaru, stood in front of him. "Kukakuku, looks like you have some skill. You did defeat Sasori after all." Alucard simply stood his ground, removed Kabikirabocho, and adopted a stance. Kabikirabocho in his right hand and his castle in his left. Orochimaru blocked Alucard's downward swing with the flat side of his Kusanagi, whose modified body could hardly support the weight of the iron broadsword and the force Alucard applied to his blade. "Oh, Kabikirabocho, the sword of Zabuza, the demon of the mist. I wonder how it will fare against my sword of Kusanagi." Then, aiming his castle at Orochimaru's head, Alucard fired. The Sanin moved his head to dodge, then leapt back. He had to avoid a ground attack just as Alucard was about to fire at him once more. He noticed a hand when he looked at the ground. A silver-haired shinobi with glasses emerged from the hand after it had retreated back into the ground. Then Orochimaru spoke to his subordinate. Just pushing his glasses up, Kabuto asked, "What took you so long, Kabuto?" Ignoring his justification, Orochimaru remarked, "You know how hard it is to do the hiding like a mole technique in this marsh? Kabuto, you will fight him. It is a good time to test your new modifications in a combat situation." His refusal infuriated the Sanin, who said, "Orochimaru, are you sure about that? He did defeat 2 members of Akatsuki on his own after all." Kabuto charged at Alucard with cage level speed after hearing the words, "Kabuto, do as I say. I didn't give those modifications to you, so you couldn't use them." Alucard simply made a horizontal arc with Kabikirabocho. Kabuto ducked beneath it and used a chakra scalpel to cut Alucard's side, but it didn't do much. Alucard then used the momentum of his swing to turn around and shoot Kabuto in the head at close range after he had turned around and attempted to stab him with a curved kunai. Kabuto was flung backwards, his forehead gushing blood. Kabuto was shot 5 more times by Alucard, who was aware of his regeneration. Alucard was pleased when Kabuto collapsed to the ground, motionless. After that, he focused on Orochimaru. Orochimaru simply grinned ruthlessly and said, "You had a brave subordinate, thinking that he could defeat me by charging me without taking me off guard. He was a fool." Alucard's eyes widened and he turned around, but Kabuto's curved kunai decapitated him. "Are you sure about your past tense?" he asked. The headless body of Alucard dropped to the ground. He had his back to the floor. Kabuto simply raised his glasses once more. "You were quite vicious on me, hitting me with that strange weapon 6 times, but in the end it didn't matter. You died anyway." Orochimaru continued. Kabuto was about to pick up Kabikirabocho when something happened that even startled Orochimaru. "Kabuto, take his weapons, I haven't seen anything like them." With no head, Alucard began to aim the castle in his left hand at Kabuto's head and fired. Kabuto was launched into the air. Then Alucard got to his feet and regenerated his brain. Orochimaru, captivated by what was going on, glanced at the spot where his head was, which was vanishing into darkness. Then Alucard charged Kabuto while sheathing his castle. In an attempt to cut the medic in half, he used both hands to swing Kabikirabocho. Then Kabuto used his forearm to block it. The blade continued to cut through his flesh, but it came to a stop at the bone, which was simultaneously breaking and healing. They were at a standstill after Alucard had the upper hand until he was nearly through his arm. The tips of Kabuto's fingers then exploded with bones as he pointed his hand at Alucard. All of the bony bullets struck Alucard. Despite this, Alucard continued to draw his jackal. Then he shot Kabuto's right hand, causing it to explode and splatter blood all over the place. The owner of that appendage let out a painful scream. Alucard then slashed at Kabuto's neck after removing his sword from his opponent's arm. Kabuto dodged, but the jackal aimed at his left upper arm caught him off guard. Alucard shot his arm off with a crazy smile. Then, at his wrist, Kabuto fashioned a bone blade. He was aware that he would perish at the hands of one of the monsters even though he couldn't defeat Alucard. Desperately, he charged Alucard. After waiting until he was close, Alucard cut Kabuto's final arm off at the shoulder. Then he separated the medic's legs from his body by shooting his kneecaps with his jackal. As he lay in a pool of his own blood, Kabuto turned to face Alucard, his eyes displaying nothing but acceptance. He was interesting, but not as fascinating as Anderson, Alucard had to admit. In this case, that man would still be engaged in combat. Alucard simply used both hands to pick up his opponent and then bit his neck, gaining his memories and draining his blood. The memories would have infuriated a lesser man, but they had no significance for Alucard. However, he later recalled the Edo Tensei experiments. They initiated an unprecedented event in history. The vampire Alucard grew angry. Orochimaru was practically drooling when he saw Alucard's body in the marshes in the watery country. It had incredible powers. It could shatter the bones of a Kaguya, who were almost indestructible. It was also capable of healing from the deadliest wounds. If it weren't for the fact that all Biju except the Sanbi and the Kyuubi are sealed and the other two are on the verge of reforming, Orochimaru would have nearly believed that he was Jinchuriki. He then watched as Alucard began to consume his subordinate Kabuto's blood. He observed that Alucard ceased moving and abruptly started speaking, saying, "It isn't even that much of a drawback that he probably has to drink blood to sustain himself." He was clearly angry, but Alucard controlled it. "I have seen a baby being raped, a man being tortured for information he didn't have, an entire country being slaughtered, a man who impregnated women so he could eat the babies, a woman being sold for wine by his husband. The ones who commit these acts are monsters, but you. For you I haven't such title, but I have 9 words for you." The memory continued to haunt him despite this. Memory. There was a line of people in chains, indicating that Kabuto was in a dungeon. Orochimaru was standing next to Kabuto, and a set of scrolls and a kunai with seal tags for the Edo Tensei were standing at his other side. Then Orochimaru called out to one of the men who were chained. He entered a container that could confine a Jinchuriki. Orochimaru was standing in front of the container when Kabuto handed him one of the scrolls and seal tags. He unfolded the scroll, dabbed it with blood, and set it on the floor. The man was then surrounded by symbols that began to appear on the ground. Orochimaru created a hand sign, and paper emerged from the glowing symbols. The paper began to completely envelop the man before changing into a different person who was dressed in a sound shinobi outfit. There were cracks all over his body. Then, somewhat bewildered, he began to look around. Then he saw Orochimaru and asked, "Where am I?" Ignoring him, Orochimaru put the kunai with the sealing tag inside his body and asked, "Orochimaru, did you save me? Where am I?" The man who had been revived began to convulse. The cracks became larger and more numerous, and the body began to lose color. Orochimaru merely gazed at his former subordinate emotionlessly, saying, "What have you done to me? Please, stop it, Orochimaru." Sama. He gave the order for another of his men to sequester his test subject once the man's body ceased changing. The man was being mummified while still yelling and having seizures. After that, they sealed the mummy. After that, they hauled it off to a storage facility. After that, Orochimaru approached Kabuto and uttered. Kabuto wrote down, "This tag is a failure, it just damages the soul and doesn't erase the personality of the soul." However, he had a question. Orochimaru looked at his right hand and asked, "Orochimaru, why didn't you just release the Edo Tensei?" It is a possibility that the seal tag disturbed the Edo Tensei, and if my tag works I will never have to undo the Edo Tensei. Kabuto simply nodded. The procedure was then repeated by Orochimaru. Every time, they used the next person in line to bring the victim of the last experiment back to life. They sealed off and stored the test subject after testing the subsequent seal tag. There were only mummified corpses in the storage after all the experiments. And Alucard would never be able to forgive Orochimaru for disturbing the resting place of the dead. Additionally, he had the audacity to seal those souls for almost eternity without their senses. Only his familiars helped him hold onto what little sanity he still had, and only for 50 years. He still despises Arthur Helsing for that, and he will receive a rigorous Alucard-style torture session when he encounters him in hell. Orochimaru, who was salivating over this body in his mind, wrenched him from his violent thoughts. It's amazing that this man is even more capable than the Sharingan at stealing memories from someone he has a blood connection to. Alucard then placed his hands in a rectangle in front of his head and asked, "Oh, what are those 9 words?" Only Alucard's gloves were visible to Orochimaru. The rest of his body was completely dark. Alucard became surrounded by a red glow. The symbols on the gloves turned red. Release Control Art Restriction System, Levels 3, 2, 1. In the rectangle Alucard's hands formed. A red eye opened. Other eyes on Alucard's body opened. Then, to Orochimaru's surprise, Alucard charged the Sannin. Then a hand emerged from Orochimaru's chest, but Alucard recognized it as a mud clone and wasn't duped. When Orochimaru turned to mud, he was shown to be correct. He turned and used both his jackal and castle to block Orochimaru's downward blow. Orochimaru merely grinned, but it vanished as Alucard's stomach opened up like a maw. Kabikirabocho shot out of it, dividing the upper and lower body of Orochimaru. When snakes slithered out of both Orochimaru's body parts and headed toward the other, Alucard believed it was over. Orochimaru was reassembled by the snakes, and the wound healed naturally. Alucard snarled and fired both of his guns at Orochimaru after changing into his black straitjacket, pants, and boots. Orochimaru tried to punch Alucard and avoided all of his bullets, demonstrating a remarkable amount of flexibility and agility. Alucard punched Orochimaru's hand after cocking his hand back and gaining a great deal of muscle. Orochimaru's arm was blown from his body. Then Orochimaru leapt back. After a moment of stiffness, he opened his mouth, and Orochimaru emerged with both arms back. He then put it on the ground, and 1,000 snakes emerged. It seems that close range is not possible with this guy, but what a wonderful body, maybe it can hold my sage mode. They all opened their mouths and charged at Alucard. The snakes formed a steel wall as Kusanagi. Like swords emerged from them. Alucard simply wriggled through the snakes and changed into a river of shadows. Then he tore up every snake. Then, like a two-headed wolf, he pulled himself together and charged Orochimaru. Then, Orochimaru made a hand gesture, and Alucard made a huge breakthrough by blowing a wind release just as he was about to leap. Then the two-headed wolf collided with the three. Bang! All of a sudden, Orochimaru's heart was missing from his body. Slowly, he glanced over his shoulder and saw the jackal in a puddle of shadows and eyes. The puddle changed into Alucard, and the two-headed wolf vanished. Conversely, Orochimaru parted his lips and began to peel off his skin once more. On the inside, he was thinking differently, but his body shedding technique does use a lot of chakra, and he hasn't hit Alucard yet. It seems that your effort are in vain. You can't kill me, I'm immortal. Alucard pulled out Kabikirabocho and affixed a tendril of shadow to it, saying, "You fool, there is no such thing as immortality." Then he began swinging the blade quickly in circles. The blade was then hurled at Orochimaru. Orochimaru hurled multiple snakes at the vampire and had to avoid the makeshift flail. Alucard drew Kabikirabocho back and used it to cut the snakes. Then he saw that the Orochimaru that was attached to the snakes was nothing more than a husk. Then a blade shot out of the earth, piercing Alucard's stomach. Orochimaru followed the blade, followed by a snake. Alucard began climbing Kusanagi after reducing himself to centipedes. Orochimaru then gestured with his hands. Lightning style. Electrifying current jutsu. The centipedes were electrified when Orochimaru's mouth released an electric current that used the snake and the extended Kusanagi as conductors. After falling from Kusanagi, the centipedes turned into electrified pools of eyes and shadows. There were obvious signs of pain in the eyes. Alucard, who was on one knee and obviously paralyzed by the lightning jutsu, was formed when the puddles came together. The tiger seal was then created by Orochimaru, but he positioned the tips of his middle fingers behind his index fingers. Orochimaru's head swung at Alucard's neck as his neck grew longer. He lost sensation in his neck and the rest of his body just before he bit down. Alucard's head was severed. That jerk just played it, Orochimaru, the best Sannin of all, deceived me twice. How dare you make fun of me? Orochimaru then forgot all his desires to acquire Alucard's body and wanted to destroy him. I will make him pay. Snakes reattached his head and torso after emerging from them. After reviewing the hand signs, he stated. With that, he leapt into the air and spit out a huge amount of flames on the ground, setting the whole place on fire. Die, fire style. Hell's punishment. Gazing at the flames, Orochimaru landed on a nearby tree before collapsing. Damn it, I'll have to go back and switch to a new body because this one has reached his limits. Alucard's laughter interrupted him as he was thinking, at least I destroyed him. What a shame it was such a magnificent body. He saw Alucard in the middle of the fire, the flames encircling him but not touching him, and said, impossible, he should be nothing but a crisp. Orochimaru wasn't sure whether he should be happy or afraid that Alucard was still alive. Orochimaru was then slashed by Alucard as he leapt. Orochimaru simply shed his dysfunctional body and changed into a white snake to get out of it. He huddled up against a tree. Alucard said crazily as he gazed at the enormous snake. He then pulled out his guns and began shooting at Orochimaru, saying, Fitting that your real body would be like a snake, now slither away and make it all the sweeter for me." In contrast, Orochimaru was moving slowly from tree to tree, buying time for the poison his body produces to start working. Using his sense of smell, Alucard, who was still shooting, detected that there was something in the air that had no effect whatsoever on his body. Then he created 2 shadow foxes, and they began to ambush Orochimaru. Orochimaru didn't notice the 2 foxes because he was too busy avoiding them. After one of the foxes thrashed him and felt the tree on the ground, the second fox also attacked him. Orochimaru knew who he was dealing with when he saw what had attacked him. Snakes from Orochimaru's body then attacked the foxes that were biting and clawing the Sannin. Each of them grew an arm on their back in retaliation. The jackal and castle, which the foxes used to destroy the snakes, were in those arms. Alucard then showed up and put Kabikirabocho at Orochimaru's neck as he attempted to back away. After that, Orochimaru raised his head and spit acid in Alucard's eyes. Alucard simply created a hole in his head through which the acid could flow. The foxes were forced back into the shadows by Alucard, who also threw Orochimaru's arms to the ground. Orochimaru was then certain of Alucard's identity. "You know who I am, don't you?" Alucard simply said, How did you cheat death? They didn't left a piece of you." He then bit Orochimaru's body and sucked blood, saying, "That will be part of the torture I have thought up for you. To never know how I surpassed you, now prepare for your suffering." The blood from the experiments on his body tasted awful, but Alucard persisted. After obtaining Orochimaru's memories, he learned a great deal about his adversaries. He returned to his usual appearance, complete with glasses and a hat, and resumed his journey to Kiri. Alucard was now standing in front of Kiri's arena. Because of the situation, the arena was larger than usual, but Alucard had seen larger ones. He had made the decision to adopt the look he had taken in Rio, Brazil. He had 2 bangs on either side of his chest, length hair. He was dressed in a gray costume with a black tie and a red shirt underneath. He added his usual orange glasses and gloves to finish the ensemble, but this time he did not show the symbols that usually adorned them. He kept Kabikirabocho in storage. He decided on this appearance since he was already running late from his altercation with Orochimaru, and the Kiri Shinobi would hold him back if he adopted his usual appearance. Even though those garments were well known in the elemental nations, the man wearing them still attracted attention from passers-by. Then a shinobi from Kiri spoke to him. Alucard pulled the document from his jacket and presented it to the guard, saying, "Hello sir, you're late. The first round is almost done. The last battle is almost done. Now can you show your entrance ticket?" He looked it over and found nothing unusual. Alucard then walked to his location, which seemed to be a corner at the rear of his box. "You can go through. Your seat is at the box for the Daimyo and other influential people." The cages and their guards were standing next to the box. Then he sat down quietly and examined the match. The 2 genin appeared worn out and wounded, suggesting that they were performing their final attack. The stage was merely a water-based model of the moon. Both of them practiced hand signs. Explosive style. Exploding rock. The Iwagakure born genin put his hands on the ground, causing a rock to levitate. He then thrust the rock at the other genin with his palm. The Kiri.Nin then created 2 water spheres by drawing water from the small lake inside the arena. Water style. Gunshot. He fired them at his opponent one after the other. Then the 2 jutsu struck one another. The first water sphere made contact with the exploding rock, which then exploded. The second water sphere was able to pass through safely, but the first one was stopped. The weary Iwa.Nin was then struck in the head by the water jutsu, which knocked him unconscious. After verifying the nin, the proctor stated, "Winner of the last match of the first round, Hikari of the Mist." Both shinobi received applause from the audience, who seemed to think they did really well in both genin. Alucard doesn't give a damn. He was occupied with looking for a lavender-haired woman with blue hair in the stands. He was aware that the Hyuga would be present because all of the major clans were invited, and they would never pass up an opportunity to improve their reputation. It was also possible that Hinata would be present if the Hyuga were present. Then he located his target. She did grow more beautiful over the years, and he could not deny that. In addition to wearing a lavender kimono that complemented her eyes, she grew her hair to her waist and the hair at her shoulders. By the way she sat, he could also see that she had lost her timidity, but Alucard was bothered by one thing. There was something wrong with the way she now appeared. She acted and looked like Hinata, but she wasn't Hinata. Additionally, Alucard had the impression that he had seen this far earlier. The ancient vampire couldn't figure out the answer, which greatly irritated the count. He then turned to face the arena floor, which appeared to have been restored to its original condition by the cleaning crew while he was distracted. In actuality, the design was rather straightforward. There were some rocks the size of an average genin on the level ground, while others were slightly larger and smaller. Half of the stage was covered by a shallow pond in the middle. The proctor then declared, "We now announce a break of half an hour to allow the genin to recover their strength. In the meantime we will allow an exhibition match against one of our finest shinobi." A shinobi with dark eyes and short blue hair then emerged with a shunsen. He was dressed in sandals, a blue, striped shirt, and cow pattern shorts. His glasses, which are attached to ear protectors, completed his appearance. A bandaged sword with two connected hilts was visible on his back. It was Haramekure. Chojiro's forehead protector was in the holster for the sword, which was resting on his chest. He appeared quite uncertain and submissive while he was a swordsman of the mist, but then he glanced at the cage's box and noticed the Mizukage grinning at him. Then he stood up straight and his expression changed to one of resolve. With the exception of the Mizukage, all of the cages were taken aback by this discovery. They didn't display their Junin exams for a reason. An exhibition match with a Junin was unheard of. Both scales Onoki offered some commentary on this. The Tsuchikage was flanked by his guards, Akatsuki and Kuretsuchi. "You're taking a foolish gamble on this one, youngster. Any shinobi worth his salt would never accept this challenge. He would just show all his skills to the enemy." Then the Raikage answered. "You're forgetting that the crowd doesn't know this. So if no. One responds to the challenge, then the crowd will think that we are afraid of him, boosting the reputation of Kiri. And if someone agrees, then Kiri will get a match where they can show the crowd that they aren't weak even after their war. So it is a win-win situation for Kiri. But it's strange that you took a swordsman of the mist, Mizukage." Gaara, who was seated beside the Raikage, asked, "How are you sure that he is a swordsman? The sword could just have a strange shape?" "That blade is Haramekure, the sword that controls chakra. Beside him were Darui, the heir to the Sandame's Black Lightning style, and Killer Bee, Jinchuriki of the Eight Tails. My foolish brother has an infatuation with swords, so he was always rambling about them, especially those of the seven swordsmen of the mist." Sighing at his younger brother's rapping habits, the Raikage said in a dangerous yet irritated tone, "Bro, you actually listened to what I said, instead of smacking my head." B stepped back, put his hands in a protective position, and said, "B, if you don't stop rapping you shall receive my iron claw." One of the Hokage's bodyguards, Might Guy, was about to yell, "You don't have to use the claw this time, because this will be Killer Bee's last rhyme." However, Tsunade's glance silenced him. His porn was being read by her other bodyguard. Next, the proctor stated. For a brief moment, the audience was silent. "Is there anyone in the stands that want to fight Chojiro, one of the seven swordsmen of the mist?" Killer Bee would have loved to, but his brother's glance stopped him. Then there was a voice from the stands. The audience appeared shocked when the speaker said, "I will fight him, but I will have to change clothes." The daimyo were not actual fighters, and their guards were not permitted in the seats designated for them. He was regarded with suspicion by the cages and their guards. The voice was familiar to Kakashi and the Sand siblings. After a moment of silence from the Sand siblings, Kakashi whispered in the Hokage's ear. "Hokage. Sama, that man over there is Alucard." The Hokage was indignant on the inside but showed no outward signs of reaction to the news. "That piece of shit has no right to display his face here." When he saw that no one was around, Alucard changed into his normal form and headed for the stage. "He killed my men and then he dares to show his face here." Alucard then got up and went to the stairs. Chojiro and the proctor were waiting downstage, and he continued to wear a determined expression. Then, from one of the entrances, he noticed two orange orbs. Alucard then departed from the shaded area and waited at the pond's edge. The shinobi all looked surprised when they saw Alucard walking with his red coat and hat. Meitarumi, the Mizukage, developed a worried expression. None of the stories she had heard about Alucard had been positive. Then the Raikage burst out laughing. "It seems that a monkey wrench is thrown in your plans. Now what are you going to do? Continue this match and possibly lose your swordsman, or stop this match and lose what little reputation your country has?" The Mizukage paused for a moment and responded. "Let the battle continue." The Tsukikage commented, "So that's the infamous Impaler of Wave? He doesn't look like much." With his siblings closely observing Alucard, Gaara said, "Looks can be deceiving. He killed both Sasori of the Red Sands and Deidara the Mad Bomber. Two nin who are both S-rank missing. Nin. They were all interested in what he was capable of." Aoi, the Mizukage's guard, then interpreted this as a warning to stop talking or face the Mizukage's wrath. "Well, We see now what's he capable of. He looks quite hot though. The cage's gaze was fixed on the shinobi on the stage. The proctor asked Alucard, "May I know your name, mister?" The proctor then said to the audience, "Shitsuki Alucard. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the battle between Chojuro and Shitsuki Alucard. The same rules as in the exams apply in this match. Everything is allowed, but when your opponent forfeits or I say it so, you stop immediately. Now let this battle begin." Chojuro was quick to eliminate Haramekure. Then he stood with each hand on a different blade handle. Alucard, however, removed a hilt from his coat gradually. Chojuro fainted when he saw the hilt. That was the hilt of Kabikirabocho, and he recognized it. He pondered the location of the blade until he recalled a brief fact about Kabikirabocho. Firstly, the sword was well known throughout the world for its ability to repair damaged blades using blood. Secondly, it was easy for its user to change the metal it was made of back into the blood it was made from. The metal and hilt did not even need to make contact. The reason that almost everyone was aware of this ability wasn't because it was supposed to be kept a secret, rather, it was because no one knew how to use it effectively. Only in dire circumstances did Mangetsu, who was proficient with all 7 swords, use this ability. Then, as blood soaked through the fabric of Alucard's coat on his arm, he was startled out of his thoughts. After that, the blood moved in Kabikirabocho's direction. The sword reshaped himself to his former glory after avariciously absorbing the blood. Then Alucard stood up. After exchanging glances, the two swordsmen charged. Alucard and Chojuro's fight started out simply enough with a swing. The two swordsmen made the decision to try their swings against one another. Upon connecting, both swords were able to discern each other's proficiency in the art of wielding a sword. Then Chojuro realized that Alucard was stronger than him and thus had the advantage. Then he leapt back and unwrapped Hiramikure's bandages. After that, chakra began to pour out of the 2 holes and cover the entire sword. Chojuro then formed a hammer out of his sword by pumping more chakra into it. He swung it at Alucard, who slid backwards until he reached the stadium's edge after blocking with Kabikirabocho's flat side. After transforming his hammer into a 4-meter long sword, Chojuro attempted to slit Alucard, who simply leapt into the air, before swinging Kabikirabocho. The crowd was perplexed by this, but the shinobi saw that something had been thrown at Chojuro. Just as the projectile slammed into Chojuro, he quickly made a slab of chakra. To keep his stance, Chojuro had to exert all of his strength. In order to prevent himself from sliding away, he even had to direct his chakra toward the ground. Chojuro examined the projectile embedded in the chakra surrounding his blade and saw that it was Kabikirabocho's first 20 centimeters. Alucard then used his levity ability to land on the pond. Then, without giving the Kiri.Nin an opportunity to defend himself, he charged Chojuro while hurling other parts of his blade at him. "Interesting, I didn't know that Kabikirabocho could separate himself," the Hokage replied. When the Raikage heard the rhyme, he got up and pulled B to the back of the box, saying, "It is an ability that isn't used, but I'm very amused." A slight struggle could be heard, but the others chose to ignore it. Gaara even inquired. After giving it some thought, the Mizukage said, "Mizukage, can you tell us how Alucard launches part of his blade?" Because Kiri no longer owned the sword. Kabikirabocho has 2 abilities. It can use blood to repair itself. The second is that the metal made by this method can revert it back to the blood it was made. He uses this ability when he swings his blade. He makes one thin layer of blood separating apart from the blade. The blood that was made is then being converted back, leaving no signs of it. The momentum launches the piece that was separated from the main blade. The Raikage returned home without any injuries. The others noticed a lump on Killer Bee's head and a bruised body in the back. Now was the right moment for the Hachibi to get in touch with his host. "B. Beware of this Alucard. Mr. 8, of course." B dismissed him. "That's not it. Run if you ever encounter this man in combat." "What are you discussing? We can definitely defeat him if we work together." "B, I'm serious. Even with my help, you can't beat him." B scowled a little. He was strong on his own, but when he was with others, he was even stronger, making it nearly impossible for anyone to defeat him. "What gives you that impression?" "It's just a feeling that I have," B said gravely. A Baiju could be trusted to have feelings, and the Kyuubi could even figure out whether someone was lying to him and what his true intentions were. "I see. Thank you, Mr. 8. From me, greetings." A stalemate between Alucard and Chojuro was visible on stage. The Kabikirabocho was reduced to a gigantic hilt with a blade that measured 10 centimeters. Chojuro then created a chakra tendril and attempted to use it to attack Alucard. Despite Alucard's attempted leap back, the tendril still scraped his arm. Alucard showed no signs of slowing down, but Chojuro was breathing heavily. Although Kabikirabocho was much smaller and the pieces were on the ground, Chojuro did have an advantage. However, that benefit was short-lived when Alucard stated. He then ordered the separated parts of Kabikirabocho to turn back into blood, saying, "I guess I will have to feed it. It seems like Kabikirabocho is hungry." The Kabikirabocho was then restored as the blood flew back in its direction. Chojuro then made the decision to change strategies, putting Haramekure back in its holster and practicing hand signals. Hidden Mist Jutsu. A thick mist enveloped the entire area, making it impossible for anyone other than Byakugan users to see through it. The crowd remained on the edge of their seats, waiting for the mist to clear, despite their obvious dissatisfaction with the situation. Nothing happened for a moment until someone spoke over the haze. Forfeit. The crowd saw the situation as the mist withdrew. Chojuro's neck was pressed up against Alucard's blade. He was obviously surprised that he didn't anticipate Alucard's move. Although he wasn't as skilled as Zabuza, he wasn't incompetent either. Then he wondered about something else. It was Alucard who asked, "How did you found me?" Chojuro examined the blade and found nothing until he noticed a small chip. Look closer at Kabikirabocho. Then he noticed a small amount of blood on his feet. Alucard then ordered the blood to return to the blade he had placed on his back, saying, "He must have placed it when directed the blood back his sword and then used it to track me." Next, the proctor stated. The audience then cheered the two shinobi as they announced, winner Chitsuki Alucard. Just as Alucard was ready to depart, Shunsen sent a messenger. The messenger then departed with a Shunsen, saying, "The Mizukage asked you to come to the box. Please don't go by Shunsen, the guards could possibly attack you." Chojuro and Alucard went silently to the cage's box. Chojuro knelt when he got there. "I'm sorry, Mizukage. Sama, I couldn't manage to beat him." The Mizukage grinned at him after hearing those things. "Chojuro, you did a fantastic job, so I can't expect you to defeat an S-rank nin. Now, rest." Chojuro blushed a little and walked away. However, Alucard's focus was on the Hokage, who was glaring at him all the time, rather than the Mizukage. Alucard then made the decision to aggravate her even further. "Could you please stop glaring at me? We're supposed to be here as civilized people, not act like children." Alucard then stopped grinning as he usually does and said, "How dare you say that after you slaughtered my men? Those men came here, armed to the teeth, ready to perform their duty, to kill for their duty, to die for their duty. That's all there is to it. War is a gamble and you gambled with weak cards and lost. So don't blame me for their deaths." The Hokage asked angrily, "So you're telling me that I'm responsible for their death? You're the cage, in the end you're responsible for your men's fate." There was a pause, but the tension had subsided. Since they were not conversing, Tamari used the opportunity to ask Alucard a question, albeit apprehensively because she was still one of his preferred drinkers. Alucard.san, why did you impale those men? For two reasons. The first one is to strike fear into the hearts of my enemy. And the second one was her reply, but Tamari needed the confirmation even though she knew in her heart what Alucard would say. It's fun. The Hokage's reply was, "You're a monster." One red-haired Cage was perplexed by the response, but aren't we all in the same boat? Explain yourself. Even now you're sending genin to battle which can kill them, and for what? Just a bit of money. Face it, we're nothing but incorrigible warmongers. After Alucard was finished, three of the Cage had the grace to consider their own actions that they had taken as Cage or even as normal. You may be hailed as saints and protectors in your village, but when it comes to your enemies you're nothing but the greatest monster. You would kill them without hesitation, and you would even start wars if it benefited you or your village. They were all aware of Alucard's correctness. The Mizukage was reminded of how she reduced her opponents to puddles of blood or lava by using her lava and boil releases. The Raikage recalled how his blows annihilated his foes. However, the Cage was the one who struggled with it the most. Prior to being rescued from his loneliness, he witnessed how he used his sand to crush his opponents. There were only two differences. First, he used to do it at random, but now he only does it when he encounters a challenge during his missions. The second was that, compared to earlier times, he no longer finds as much fulfillment in it. However, he still saw how the two Garas used a number of strategies to trap their opponents in his sand. They then both spread their fingers and extended their hands, completing their movements by making a fist that crushed their opponents and fed the sand blood. Is there truly no distinction? Am I lying about everything? Is it all for nothing? Will I be a monster forever? Tamari was about to lash out at Alucard after noticing his younger brother's distress, but Konkuro intervened. The two exchanged no words, but their eyes spoke for them. Then she stopped, but not before glaring accusingly at Alucard. The other heir were impacted differently. Onoki did see the validity of Alucard's statements, but he didn't give a damn because he believed that Shinobi would lose their jobs if there wasn't war. Even though Tsunade didn't believe a word of it, she was Tsunade of the Sannin, not a monster. She decided it wasn't worth the trouble to talk to him about it. She will ensure that he will die soon enough. Alucard returned to his seat in the stand, where he was congratulated by the majority of the crowd, but he couldn't care less. Now that the banter is over and the matches will start soon, I will go back to my seat. Alucard then watched the subsequent battles. Asuna.nin ultimately won the tournament, with Akiri Genin coming in second. However, the Suna Genin's superior strategy and use of puppetry made Konkuro extremely proud of his apprentice. While the rest of the population returned to their regular lives, the Kages, Daimyos, and other powerful individuals went back to their rooms to get ready for the dancing event. Aoi stopped the Mizukage just as she was ready to leave. Since such events require a great deal of preparation and time, the Mizukage sighed and said, "Mizukage Sama, I have some information that you need to hear." She would really benefit from a relaxing bath because she was so stressed. Can't it wait? She realized her bath would have to wait for a moment when she said, "It is about Alucard." Then make it quick. She was shocked to learn, he has no chakra at all, and I checked with my Byakugan, then I checked it with my sensor abilities. Then how did he stand on the water? After a quick assessment, the Mizukage concluded that nothing could be done at this time. I don't know. But there is another thing bothers me. It is that he got a little wound during his fight, but afterwards I didn't even see a sign of it afterwards, and there wasn't even a tear on his clothes. Aoi, we will do nothing. Aoi began to warn the Mizukage, clearly taken aback. Mizukage, we need to make arrangements, he is clearly dangerous. Make plans? We need a way to parry his moves. Did he simply imply that he would set me up for marriage? Unaware of the Mizukage's interpretation of his words, Aoi simply went on. We can't let a dangerous man like him create havoc in our city. She then departed for her room, leaving Aoi perplexed, saying, "Aoi, shut up or I'll kill you." The voice of a somewhat inebriated Hokage said, "How dare that piece of shit show up in this room and accuse me of being a monster?" It was wise for her guards, Kakashi and Guy, to keep their mouths shut or else they would feel her anger. Both Guy and Kakashi were active during Tsunade's tirade. I will crush that crimson fucker's balls and then impale him in the ass with those flagpole he likes so much. While Kakashi was reading his smut and considering Alucard's abilities, Guy was occupied with his workout. Levitation? Water manipulation? It might explain his peculiar bloodline and the reason he could control blood. The situation in the Cage's room was identical to that of the Hokages. Two people were silent while a blonde woman yelled about a black-haired, fanged man. She was fortunate that no one was listening to her or that the world would learn of Alucard's secret. How dare he say that? I don't care who he was in his past life. You aren't a monster, Gaara. You know that, right? She exclaimed. Gaara said nothing as she gazed at the sunset. Gaara didn't answer when he was asked, Gaara, you know that, right? Gaara? But Konkuro did. Alucard then entered the Cage's room through the ceiling, saying, the words that Alucard, I mean Naruto, said, affected him very much. Gaara tried the last 3 years to change. Now Alucard said that all his effort and achievements were in vain. He made the foundation of Gaara's world shake. You should be more silent, you could have revealed my identity, we were lucky that nobody was around. With a hint of rage in her voice, Tamari asked, you, what are you doing here? Tamari was about to respond when Gaara said, I was enjoying the sunset on the roof since my room doesn't have any windows facing in that direction, but then I heard you talking about me, so I decided to warn you. Alucard understood the question and was aware of its source. Alucard, be honest, did I change? Then he said. Gaara grinned a little when he heard Alucard say, you did. You were at first a beast and then changed to a monster. I can live with that. Alucard was at an official gathering of powerful individuals, the last place he had ever wished to be in his life. That Integra handled that for him made him very happy. In order to avoid frightening them, she didn't even bring him along to any of the meetings where she was required to explain the collateral damage. Although she was an amazing master, she had a serious weakness. Her naivete caused her to lose all of her men during the Valentine brothers' attack because she didn't anticipate that someone would attack the mansion and that Alucard would kill them before they could do any damage. She was mistaken, though. He was affected by the second consequence of her flaw, specifically his fledgling. When she got to know him and killed the assault force that attacked the Helsing mansion, his police girl, no, his Sarah's Victoria, deserved to be given a name. Alucard had a reputation to maintain, so he was quite proud of his fledgling, despite the fact that he would never tell anyone. He was also aware that he was being harsh to the small vampire, but he had no choice because of the rebellion war, and Helsing hindered her development. Instead, they made a concerted effort to prevent her from becoming a vampire in order to preserve what little humanity she still possessed. What a stupid idea. As soon as I bit her neck, she lost her humanity. Integra, you allowed your feelings to control you in this situation. You tried to take what was mine, which is even worse. Then he recalled the discussion she had with him regarding his fledgling. Backward, Alucard was still grinning as he stood in Integra's office. Integra smoked a cigar at her desk and read Alucard's report on the situation. Then, with a sigh, she said, "You did create a mess this time. You even killed a human and turned her into a vampire. Now I've read your report. Now tell me, why did you shoot both of them? You're stronger than that." Alucard grumbled and replied, "You're forgetting what these gloves that your family made do. They restrict my powers until a certain set of conditions are fulfilled, and none of the conditions were fulfilled, so I couldn't release any of them, and it's not my fault that they didn't cover this situation." Now was Integra's chance to scowl. "Well, you could have killed him first, but no, you had to play with him first." Integra winced, but she knew she couldn't hold him responsible for it. "Well, excuse me if I want to enjoy the few times I get out of my room in the dungeon." She specifically instructed him that he must never leave the dungeon, which was stocked with nothing but junk, unless summoned. It makes sense that he wants to make the most of his limited opportunities to go out. She let out another sigh and said something she would likely later come to regret. Integra already regretted her choice when Alucard flashed a menacing smile and said, "Okay, Alucard, you have permission to wander freely through the mansion and the grounds surrounding them from now on, but you will stay away from the private quarters of the people living here. Any problems?" Integra stiffened slightly at the words, "Everything is clear, my master." Now what am I going to teach the police girl first? After reading her file, she was able to recognize the similarities between Sarah's and herself. A mental picture of a blonde vampire wearing a tight red outfit and a tiny Carmen Sandiego hat then came to her. Red eyes and a crazy smile that promised pain, and plenty of it completed the picture. She was unable to tell whether the image was Alucard's or her own. She had to prevent Alucard from corrupting the poor girl in any case. The room began to cool several degrees, and the air became so heavy that she had trouble breathing. Alucard then spoke, but it sounded more like a growl. "Oh no, you don't. You won't do such thing. As your master, I command you to stay away from Sarah's Victoria, unless she comes to you. You will not train her in any of her vampire abilities, and even then you will have to ask for my permission." "What did you just say?" Alucard asked, turning around and looking menacing with his red eyes gleaming. He was obviously possessive when he said, "She's mine. Nothing will change that. Not yours, not anyone else's, she's mine." Integra fell backwards because she was so shocked. Alucard's eyes went back to orange as he abruptly stopped. Then he bowed and uttered. She got her bearings, stood up, and made an effort to stop shaking. "I'm sorry, master. I was out of line." She had never seen this side of Alucard, and her fear was evident in her voice as she asked, "And what was that?" Alucard then began to fade away, but the final words, "you would classify it as," were still audible. Parental instincts. In the days that followed, there was some tension between the two. Alucard was still upset that Integra had put himself in the way of his fledgling. Integra was still opposed to seeing another Alucard. Ultimately, Integra gave Alucard permission to instruct Sarah's in the use of weapons and how to defeat monsters, but otherwise prohibited him from doing so. However, that did not imply that Alucard did not discover any vulnerabilities. Instead of giving her direct instruction, he simply changed his strategy and put her in circumstances that helped her develop into a vampire. He had to give her fledgling some credit as well, because she had an amazing innate understanding of being a vampire, even though this method produced surprisingly positive results. This understanding was evident in the way she battled in the Badrick hospital. Integra ordered Walter to give Sarah's a weapon that would ensure she would be far from her enemies after learning of her outburst. For this reason, he created the Harkonnen, a massive cannon that can only fire one bullet at a time but has a punch that can destroy nearly anything. The project was successful but ineffective against a real vampire because it could only hold one bullet, which rendered it useless unless she was far away or caught a vampire off guard. Any respectable vampire could avoid a single bullet, and even if she were to surprise him, the vampire could avoid the hit in a way that would make it at least not fatal. It would be pointless since he would have time to regenerate during the time she would need to reload. Even the pathetic vampire who used it to attack the manor was beyond her power. However, even after Helsing was smothered, she developed into a vampire deserving of being Dracula's direct descendant. End flashback. A loud voice interrupted him as he was thinking, Integra, you couldn't stop her from becoming a true vampire in the end. Koyuki Kazuhana, the daimyo of the Land of Spring, said, No, I will not make a trade agreement with your nation. Not after what your village did to our hero. It turned out that the fire daimyo was the one she was arguing with. The male was more composed but had a hint of disappointment on his face, while the female is enraged. Are you sure? Both our countries would benefit from this agreement. You shouldn't let your personal beliefs get the better of you. The woman grew increasingly frustrated. In exchange for what? We would lose our honor, our values and beliefs, in other words we would lose ourselves. If we could only gain prosperity without those things, then we won't need that prosperity. So I will not accept this, so go pester someone else. The fire daimyo was about to react but Alucard overcame him. You shouldn't raise your voice, it sounds bad that way and everyone is watching. The two daimyo turned to face Alucard, who was dressed in the same attire as when he entered Kiri, after realizing that everyone was indeed watching. Then Koyuki spoke to him. Alucard gave her a charming smile and said, So you're the Count of Wave? I should thank you for preventing Konoha from conquering a village that has a trade agreement with us. The fire daimyo then barged in, saying, The pleasure was all mine. Alucard raised an eyebrow, unable to think of anything they would need to discuss. Alucard.san, I just wanted to talk to you. The fire daimyo then asked, So what do you want to discuss with me? You see, the last years the relationship between our country have been tense, so I decided to remedy, so I offer you a chance to make an alliance with us. So you want to make an alliance with us, while Konoha, who is under your protection, killed my people's hero and afterwards tried to conquer us? They even killed our previous daimyo. So why would I want to have an alliance with you? Alucard said with an icy rage. We all will have to forget the past at one moment and there's prosperity for both our countries with this. I see, I don't mind the idea, but I have one condition that is non-negotiable. The fire daimyo was thrilled that his small plot was succeeding and that the alliance was only a front under his control. What is that condition? He asked. Alucard selling out his nation to Konoha infuriated Koyuki. All of the other people in the room were taken aback by this. They had assumed that Alucard would reject the alliance. Gaara simply scowled as he considered Alucard's strategy. Everyone was taken aback by what Alucard had to say. The fire daimyo was taken aback by Alucard's demand and his audacity, while everyone else was speechless. I want Konoha and every citizen in it, being judged by Wave's law for their crimes against our country and its hero. You can't be serious, Alucard stated without a trace of humor. I'm very serious and don't forget this is non-negotiable. I can't accept this. Then there will be no alliance between our counties. I can't be an alliance where our interests aren't defended. Knowing that he had his verbal opponent where he wanted him, Alucard grinned and said, Why are you both so attached to the boy? He was just one man that was sacrificed for the greater good of our country. The daimyo was taken aback by the question but responded promptly, So you would do the same? Yes. He tensed up and was unsure of how to respond when he heard, in the same way. The question baffled the Kazuhana. What do you mean in the same way? Alucard was now perplexed. He said, Don't you know? At that point, the Cage made the decision to support his friend. It was a cover. Up of Konoha. Jiraiya, the Hyugas, and the Yamanakas had to put in extra hours to ensure that this information didn't leave the village, making it the largest cover up in Konoha's history. Why didn't you tell anyone? Gaara explained that they wouldn't believe it due to my past. Alucard merely gave a nod. The spring daimyo asked, What are you talking about? Naruto Uzumaki was tortured before his execution. Tortured? She said, a little scared. The Mizukage gave it some thought, but she had to confess that she was also quite interested. Yes, Gaara, could you show them by henging yourself? It's far easier then to tell the entire tale and I know that you saw the execution with your eye. If that's okay with you, Mizukage. Sama? So she agreed. That would be fine, Cage.san, don't try to use too much chakra, the guards are already very tense. On the day of his execution, Gaara then used the small amount of chakra he had collected to henge himself in a replica of Naruto. They noticed a boy with bloody blonde hair after the smoke had cleared. Scars, bruises, and other wounds were all over his body. He had multiple tooth loss. Because of the blood, he was only wearing a pair of red, ragged pants. The words, demon, and Kyubi, carved into his chest, along with the fact that he had 2 holes in his head where his eyes should have been, were what most appalled the crowd. When the majority of people saw the boy, they puked, but Koyuki sobbed. She broke down in tears as she expressed how unfair it was for him to endure such suffering. After unhedging himself, Gaara did something that startled both of his siblings. He tried to calm the female by giving Koyuki a hug. Although he had never made such physical contact with a stranger, they both knew that he had made good progress. The daimyo of Tea and Jirocho Wasabi, the leader of his nation's highest clan, were among the crowd. His feudal lord spoke to the head of that clan. The other daimyos were also thinking about ending their trade alliances with Konoha. I think this revelation convinced me to follow your vision on our alliances with Konoha. This is just barbaric. I thought that we were better than this. Torturing him was a big no-no for them, but executing one of your own for the sake of the greater good is one thing. Each of the cages responded differently. The Tsuchikage, for example, viewed it indifferently, believing that nothing could be done because this was a Jinchuriki's life. The Raikage, on the other hand, decided he would stop at nothing to prevent this from happening to Yugito and his younger brother after imagining him in the same situation. When the Mizukage realized that the fate of Jinchuriki was the same as that of the bloodline holders in their civil war, she was horrified that such hatred still existed in the world. After that, she made the decision to fight in the same way that she did during the civil war. The majority of her entourage, including the Hokage, had different ideas. How is he aware? Shikaku Nara had a hunch as to how he knew that, and he even had a theory about the mystery of Alucard, but he had to confirm it with his son first. We made sure that this little piece of information never left Konoha. There's no need to incite needless fear. Alucard glanced around and saw the same reactions he had anticipated. His gaze then landed on a female Hyuga, whom he chose to stay away from to prolong the concealment of his identity. It was then that he realized her problem. When he was still Naruto, she wore a mask that resembled his own. Not on my watch, the Count thought. Not only was Hinata Hyuga having a bad day, but she was having a very bad one. All she wanted to do today was lie in bed and cry uncontrollably, but she was unable to do so at the moment. Instead, on the day her beloved was put to death, she had to go to a global event. Usually, she would visit her secret shrine to Naruto, which doubled as a grave. Before the villagers could steal or destroy them, she gathered as many personal items as she could and used them to decorate the shrine. A picture of him with his team, his goggles from before he turned into a genin, his nightcap, a picture of Yukie Fujikaze kissing his cheek. She was very envious of her, and an empty jar of medical cream were among them. Hinata shed happy tears when she saw that jar along with a number of his other treasured belongings. She simply assumed that as soon as there was no cream on it, he would discard it. He showed how much he appreciated the small gift by keeping it instead. She kept thinking about how things would be different if she could express her feelings sooner every time she looked at that jar. But as soon as those thoughts appeared, she pushed them away. Even though she had changed, she was no longer able to change that. Yes, she transformed from the insecure young lady into a self-assured woman. However, that purity had a cost. She was corrupted by a feeling known as hatred. Backward, before Naruto's battle with Neji, Hinata encouraged him while she was seated at the post at Training Ground 7. She came because she was at her breaking point. Within an hour of his execution, everyone was talking about how they had made his life extremely difficult. As she heard the stories of his suffering, she developed an unfamiliar feeling that grew stronger with each new one. Some were describing how they denied him food, while others described how they physically tortured him. She even learned that the academy's teachers stunted his growth. When she was at Ichiraku's ramen, however, the owner's stand and his daughter were bragging about how they had drugged his ramen, and that was the final straw. Then, without giving a damn where she went, she fled. She ran to Training Ground 7 out of instinct and began crying when she saw that. Then she abruptly stopped crying when she recalled what he had said. She used her jacket sleeve to dab at her tears. Then a voice spoke to her. She was obviously taken by surprise when the voice said, "You should forget him." She looked up to see Shino and Shikamaru. While Shino was unreadable as usual, Shikamaru had a slack expression on his face. Then she recalled that Naruto had been tortured by the two. The two were taken aback by the anger in her voice and didn't anticipate it from the timid Hyuga who couldn't harm a fly, but they could also relate to her response. "Why do you care?" she asked. As the Nara explained, "Hinata, don't take us wrong, we know that he wasn't a demon." "Then why didn't you protest against his execution?" Her lavender eyes were nearly watering. The feeling she had been experiencing for a while intensified when she said, "It was a necessary sacrifice. In shogi you have to sacrifice a piece in order to win the game." The question remained unsaid as she turned to face Shino. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the hive. Her next statement caught the two completely off guard. 8 trigrams. 30.2 palms. The Chunin and Genin were then thrown back after each of them took 30.2 Juken strikes on multiple Tenketsu. Then they noticed a glare that only Hyugas could give Hinata. "Then why did you torture him? Tell me," Shikamaru replied languidly as the two slowly rose to their feet. Their response earned them both another Juken strike to the chest. It was necessary to blend in. The others would look strangely at us and wouldn't trust us. It would be too troublesome. They were flung back a few meters by the force. The two didn't need to be reminded twice. They immediately fled from the enraged woman, vowing never to bring up the subject again. "You cowards, you're talking about sacrifice while you're not willing to bear even a fraction of his. You two disgust me. Now get out of my sight." She sat down exhausted after the two had left. Subsequently, she recognized the feeling as hatred. She was terrified and harbored a deep hatred for Konoha because she didn't want to become like Sasuke. After giving this a lot of thought, she concluded that she would not suppress this emotion as long as she did not allow it to rule her life. "Be careful, Konoha. You'll pay." End flashback. Even though she succeeded in obtaining Sasuke, she was ultimately unable to keep her word. She decided to play a prank on him, but it wasn't a harmless one, taking a cue from Naruto. She created a sterilizer by applying her understanding of medicine and herbs. In order to accelerate his strength growth, she was able to replace the sterilizer with one of the pills the Hokage had given him. Itachi is the only person who could ever rebuild the Uchiha clan, and no one ever noticed the switch. When she hears the news, she would adore seeing the Haruno's face. Then she turned to see her father chatting with a nobleman whose son was hesitantly glancing at her. Her father was taking advantage of the situation to set up a marriage for the benefit of the clan, which is another reason why her day was so bad. As if a man other than her beloved would ever be able to touch her like that. She looked in the direction of the voice and saw the fire daimyo arguing with a woman she recognized as Yukie Fujikaze. "No, I will not make a trade agreement with your nation. Not after what your village did to our hero." The fire daimyo didn't object to the execution. In fact, he encouraged it, so she couldn't help but mentally glare daggers at him. "Are you sure? Both our countries would benefit from this agreement. You shouldn't let your personal beliefs get the better of you." Hinata could see right through his attempts. He would form an alliance with the country, then use the alliance as a front to extort it, and eventually he would put a number of his men in high positions, further solidifying his hold on the country. In exchange for what? We would lose our honor, our values and beliefs. In other words, we would lose ourselves. If we could only gain prosperity without those things, then we won't need that prosperity. So I will not accept this, so go pester someone else. She was obliged to provide her with the courage. Then she noticed a black-haired, pale man approaching the group. He wore a black suit, which was typically worn by business-oriented men, and orange glasses. Alucard the Impaler of Wave was the man she knew. She was initially horrified to learn that he had killed the invading force, but she later came to the conclusion that they deserved it. Then, during the Chunin exams, she first saw him. She felt something she couldn't quite place when she saw the warrior in the red cloak. She sensed that, for some reason, she could trust him now that he was closer. The spring daimyo was then addressed by Alucard. Hinata looked around and realized that the man was correct when he said, "You shouldn't raise your voice, it sounds bad that way and everyone is watching." Then Yukie said. Hinata saw Alucard give the female daimyo a charming smile, but she also noticed that it wasn't practiced like with the other political figures. "So you're the Count of Wave? I should thank you for preventing a village that has a trade agreement with us from being conquered by Konoha." The pleasure was all mine. She was already aware of the fire daimyo's plans when she heard him say, "Alucard-san, I just wanted to talk to you." Those intentions appeared to be lost on the tall man. Every time her feudal lord attempted to persuade a daimyo to join their alliance, Hinata knew exactly what he would say. "So what do you want to discuss with me?" At least he could be decent enough to occasionally alter his lines. "You see, the last years the relationship between our country have been tense, so I decided to remedy, so I offer you a chance to make an alliance with us." "Daimyo, it would be more like signing your own submission to the fire." She could sense the rage and resentment in his voice and wished she would never be the target of it. "So you want to make an alliance with us, while Konoha, who is under your protection, killed my people's hero and afterwards tried to conquer us? They even killed our previous daimyo. So why would I want to have an alliance with you?" she asked. We all will have to forget the past at one moment, and there's prosperity for both our countries with this. Does he practice those lines beforehand each time he has to persuade a daimyo? The same lines again. The image the thought conjured up made her laugh uncontrollably. However, no one paid attention because they were absorbed in the two people's conversation. Hinata couldn't believe that he would sell his people to Fire Country and Konoha, but she looked at Alucard's face and saw that he had other plans. I see, I don't mind the idea, but I have one condition that is non-negotiable. The Fire Daimyo asked, his face brightening at the thought of a new extension of his realm. What is that condition? Hinata understood what the man meant when he said, I want Konoha and every citizen in it, being judged by Wave's law for their crimes against our country and its hero. The Daimyo was the only judge in Wave. The Daimyo still judges all of the offenders because it was a system in place when Wave was still small and they didn't see the need to change it as it grew. Stated differently, he desired to have Konoha at his disposal. You can't be serious. Hinata knew that even though the Daimyo was foolish in her opinion, he would never permit such a thing because Fire Country's prosperity was largely due to Konoha. Alucard added salt to the wound by saying, I'm very serious and don't forget this is non-negotiable. So the Fire Daimyo said, I can't accept this. Hinata couldn't help but smile at the conclusion of this discussion. Then there will be no alliance between our counties. I can't be in an alliance where our interests aren't defended. One less nation that his forked tongue will corrupt. Hinata wanted to beat the man to the ground for saying, why are you both so attached to the boy? He was just one man who was sacrificed for the greater good of our country. However, she noticed something. She caught it, but it was fleeting. She only noticed it when she stalled, watched Naruto from a distance. The glint in his eyes indicated that he had the target exactly where he wanted him when he was busy pulling practical jokes on them. Alucard asked plaintively, so you would do the same? Hinata couldn't help but think, yes, hypocrite. In the same way. She was a little taken aback to learn that, as only Gaara, who had witnessed the execution via his sand eye, was supposed to be aware of it. When the Spring Daimyo asked, what do you mean in the same way? Alucard gave her a perplexed look. Don't you know? Hinata was shocked that Gaara would cut this off, believing that Gaara purposefully left out the torture. It was a cover up of Konoha. Although she didn't inquire, she was aware that he did it because he understood Naruto's desire to spare his friend's pain. The man in black asked, why didn't you tell anyone? They wouldn't believe it due to my past. The woman with the black hair interrupted, what are you talking about? Naruto Uzumaki was tortured before his execution. Tortured? After learning that one of the most significant individuals in her life had passed away in agony, Hinata felt sorry for the daimyo. Even now, she still experiences nightmares about the image, which she knew would haunt her. Hinata's eyes widened for a moment as she said, yes, Gaara, could you show them by henging yourself? It's far easier to show than to tell the entire tale, and I know that you saw the execution with your sand eye. If that's okay with you, Mizukage. Sama? She wanted to flee right then and there, but the elders were watching her intently. She didn't want to witness it in person because the nightmares were already so terrible. She made an effort to be ready for it, but she knew she would never be. Gaara then got the hand signs ready. That would be fine, Kazekage.san. Don't try to use too much chakra. The guards are already very tense. Hinata saw a perfect duplicate of the man she loved when the smoke cleared. Her inability to control her tears was exacerbated by the henge's perfection. The spring daimyo sagged and began to weep. To his sibling's surprise, Gaara then gave the upset woman a hug. Alucard began to approach her after she realized he was staring at her. Alucard was able to read most people's actions, but he was completely unable to read others. He was completely enthralled with those people. He was aware that Hinata was one of those individuals as well. At least he knew what was bothering the woman and how to handle it, so he approached Hinata. She looked good in the dress, he had to admit. It was a lavender, strapless dress that hung down to her ankles. She added a fox-themed sliver necklace to make it uniquely hers. Then he noticed that the group was getting ready for the ball's musical selection. Alucard cut back on his speed. For some reason, she became anxious when she saw Alucard approaching her. At first, she assumed it was because he was strong, but it wasn't. She was directly in front of Alucard as he approached. Hinata felt the odd impulse to simply leap into his arms and sob uncontrollably. The girl had to use all her strength to resist. The lighting abruptly changed after that. The crowd was then addressed by the Mizukage. Alucard then bowed slightly and lowered his glasses a little before saying, ladies and gentlemen, the ball has started, so find yourself a dancing partner and enjoy the evening. Orange eyes made contact with lavender ones. May I have the honor of having this dance with you? Perplexity. Most people in the room were in that frame of mind when Hinata Hyuga, who has a member and heiress of Konoha's most prestigious clan, was asked to dance by Alucard, the Count of Wave, who also harbored resentment toward Konoha. Only two individuals could comprehend the Count's action. The Count himself and a red-haired Cage who had the kanji for love written on his forehead. He was aware that his plan was only passably good, but he also knew that he couldn't accomplish much without creating a stir. Since the head of Konoha's Yamanaka clan was present, he was unable to have a mental dialogue with her. He had no intention of disclosing his ability to quickly identify such conversations. Such things wouldn't normally concern him, but his loss to the Major made it apparent that he would need to exercise caution in the skills he displayed. Upon observing Hinata's internal conflict, he made the decision to escalate the situation. Hinata was perplexed. Why was she of interest to the Count of Wave? She lived in the nation of his adversary, and he had nothing of interest in her. She checked her surroundings twice with her Byakugan, so it would be impossible for him to have overheard her conversation with Naruto-kun in the dungeon. That was the only explanation she could think of. Then she realized she still needed to answer the Count's invitation. Usually, she would turn down such offers right away, but this time, something inside of her made her accept the offer, only to betray Naruto-kun in the process. Until she met the Count's eyes a second time, she was at a loss for what to do. To her surprise, they had turned cerulean instead of orange. They were still the shade of cerulean that she only saw in her beloved's eyes, but she blinked for a moment, thinking she had lost it. Alucard then grinned and said, "I'm honored to accept your offer, Shitsuki-san. Call me Alucard." Hinata saw that his eyes had turned orange once more. Perhaps she was going crazy because she was certain they were blue. A slow, romantic song was then played by the musicians. Hinata chose to put her hands around Alucard's waist, barely reaching his shoulder. Conversely, the Count put his arms around her neck. Their dance began at this point. Alucard, who hasn't engaged in such activities for over a century, was obviously having fun, but he became aware that his partner was having difficulties. His voice was hardly audible above a whisper, but Hinata could clearly hear him ask, "Tell me what's on your mind." She didn't need the Byakugan to notice the envious looks from some of the females, so she asked, "Why did you choose me while you easily could have chosen someone else?" This was nothing new to Alucard, who chose to ignore it. Alucard responded, "I chose you because I wanted to." However, Hinata wasn't entirely happy with the response and chose to express it. "And why is that?" The Count replied, "I saw some qualities that I admire." Since this was their first encounter, she questioned doubtfully, "Really, what were those qualities? I know of your role during our hero's execution. It takes courage to do such a thing," she said. She blushed upon learning that someone had overheard her conversation with Naruto, but she was also pleasantly surprised by the Count's compliment. "How did you see that?" Alucard smirked and explained, "Gaara saw the interaction between you two with his eye." "How did you know Gaara?" The thought of the elderly Gaara made Hinata shudder. "We met during the time he was a still blood craze." Those vacant eyes were still in her memory. If Alucard hadn't gone on with his explanation, she would have kept thinking those things. Alucard observed that he had satiated Hinata's curiosity. "We started at the wrong foot, but in the end, we noticed that we had something in common and managed to become friends. I left and I only saw him after 3 years, but he changed over the years." In order for them to speak privately, he was ready to begin making advances on the girl. That was the plan until he thought the patriarch of the Yamanaka was trying to get inside his head. With a mental smile, Alucard pulled the poor man into his head. After all, Baskerville needed a new chew toy. The Yamanaka clan chief was strolling and conversing with a number of aristocrats. However, it was all a front because he was actually reading people's minds. It served him well in a number of circumstances and was his greatest accomplishment. The fact that it was accomplished without chakra made it even more valuable. His limited range and the fact that he could only read people's thoughts at that precise moment were the only drawbacks of his methods. The majority of the information collected was given to the Hokage. He would retain and take advantage of the information if it gave his clan an advantage over the others. His clan was naturally more significant than his village. Then he saw Alucard approaching Hiyoshi's oldest child at a leisurely pace. His wife really wanted to dance with him when the music began, just as he was about to approach them. He gave in and joined her in dancing. Then Inoichi led himself and his wife to Hinata and Alucard. When he finally got close enough, he applied his method to Alucard in the hopes of extracting something significant. When he used the mind transfer jutsu, he was surprised to feel that familiar tug on his mind. The mindscape of Alucard, it was the most gory mindscape Inoichi had ever seen. At night it was a thick forest of bloodied trees, very narrow. Then he gasped and looked up. It was a mass of stakes rather than a forest of trees. A person was impaled on each of those stakes. Then he felt a solid beneath the surface, but all he saw was blood. A black mist completed the mindscape, adding to its eerie atmosphere. There is no other explanation for this type of mindscape, so that man must be a monster. However, how did I end up here? Perhaps I unconsciously used the mind transfer jutsu. Then he heard human screams, followed by a howl. He chose to follow the sounds because he wanted to know what was screaming. Inoichi's clothes were torn and bloodied from the stakes, and he walked for what seemed like hours. At last he came to a clearing. Because there were no stakes, he could finally see the blood-red moon. A tree, several meters high, stood in the middle of the clearing. There was a rope on one of the tree's branches. Inoichi noticed the snake Sannin, Orochimaru, where the rope connected. On the surface, the Sannin appeared to be in poor condition. At the moment, the rope was blocking his airway, causing him to choke. The rope snapped, letting him fall just as he appeared to be about to faint. A wooden spike protruded from the ground as he was falling, impaling Orochimaru in the stomach. The Sannin was impaled in each limb by the sudden eruption of 4 more spikes. Then, each of those spikes began to glow a different color. One spike ignited his right arm with a red glow. Ice began to creep along the Sannin's other arm as another spike began to glow blue. Orochimaru was electrocuted by the third one, which was yellow. The final one was green. When Inoichi noticed that the man's leg was dissolving as if it had been thrown into an acid bath, he began to wonder what the color green meant. Orochimaru was screaming in pain and couldn't stop. Inoichi assumed the torture session was over when the spikes abruptly stopped glowing. The sound of wings flapping disproved his theory. Inoichi noticed a bat colony when she turned to face the sound. The Sannin were attacked by the bats that descended. His throat was torn away. Additionally, they began gnawing at his internal organs after biting through his torso. His heart was ripped from his ribcage by some bats. The mindscape reverberated with the Sannin's scream. The Sannin was then pulled toward the gallows, which had been miraculously restored, after being bitten by all the bats. The Sannin's body then began to mend as the spikes emerged in the earth. After positioning the Sannin, the bats dropped him, hanging him, and the cycle was restarted. He would have definitely puked if he hadn't been employed at the Anbu IT division. Woof. The sound nearly made him jump out of his skin. He noticed a black dog when he looked around. It had a pair of crimson eyes and a pair of incredibly sharp teeth. Then Inoichi saw that the dog had a dog tag attached to an iron collar. Then he knelt down and picked up the dog tag. He then turned to face the dog, who was wagging his tail, and said, "For whoever finds Baskerville." The dog joyfully barked at Inoichi, who was still reading the tag, saying, "Baskerville, what a cute name for a dog like you." He then turned to face Baskerville and noticed 4 sets of red eyes staring at him. "Be ready to suffer for eternity as dog food. What kind of dog tag is this? He looks pretty docile to me," he asked. The dog's head began to enlarge until it was as large as Inoichi, who was paralyzed with terror. Then, with his teeth gleaming, the black dog opened his maw and prepared to rip through the Mindwalker's flesh. To his surprise, Inoichi attempted to return to his body but was unable to do so. It seemed as though he was being blocked by something. Then he realized that the Count had brought him in here and that he had not infiltrated Alucard's mind. The Yamanaka was then snarled at by Baskerville. He reacted instinctively by leaping back. The blonde ran away when the giant-headed dog roared at her. Then Baskerville squirmed and came after him. Inoichi had the idea for Baskerville, but he was not dressed for running and was unable to move effectively in the stake forest. Conversely, Baskerville was speeding through it as if it were insignificant. He was following closely behind Inoichi. After that, the dog briefly vanished. Inoichi let out a sigh of relief before he experienced a searing pain. With the man's leg between his teeth, the dog reappeared in a sudden burst of speed. Inoichi attempted to scuttle away from the evil canine. Baskerville swallowed the leg after growing tired of chewing on it. After jumping and biting Inoichi's other leg, the dog slowly pulled the blonde shinobi to his den. After all, he didn't want to ruin his new chew toy. Normal world. Everybody was having a good time dancing with their partner. When Inoichi went limp, that stopped. Jiraiya was complaining that he hadn't had a chance to grope Tsunade's breast, but Tsunade hurried to Inoichi's right away. Using diagnostic jutsu, she observed that a Yamanaka's body showed the usual symptoms, but she also sensed that something wasn't quite right. She concluded that he required more observation, but she also had to inform the other person in the room of the situation. Additionally, she chose to foster some mistrust because she knew she wouldn't gain any allies here. The majority of the non-Shinobi audience gasped when the Shinobi said, "I'm sorry, it seems that he was poisoned by a very advanced poison judging from the observations." The Shinobi were suspicious because they were all aware of the Yamanaka's abilities and what happened to the body when such a technique was used. The only other female cage was addressed by the Hokage. Mizukage. "Sama, you'll have to excuse us, you couldn't guarantee that we are safe from other Shinobi." She calmly said, "Of course, I'm sorry for the situation." In her mind, she was yelling and tearing her hair out. Because of one assassination attempt, all of her efforts to draw in new customers were in vain. All of the Konoha clans withdrew back into their quarters. Then Heishi spoke to his daughter. "Hinata, come here, we're retreating back in our room." Hinata then scowled with dismay. She blushed when Alucard kissed her back, but she didn't want to leave just yet. Hinata's eyes softened as she said, "An unfortunate event, but nothing we can do about it. May we meet again." "Indeed, I had a good time." The Count's response was a smooth, "It was my pleasure." Angry, Heishi snapped, "Hinata, come here, we don't have all day." Additionally, he considered selling her to the Count. Then Hinata went with her dad. Since the Yamanaka had already left, Alucard took advantage of the chance to establish a mental connection. "Hinata-chan, I kept my word to you." She could clearly hear the Count's smooth voice in her head. She was obviously taken aback, but she was able to conceal it well. "What?" Sensually aware of Alucard's true identity, she exclaimed with a hint of pure joy. That knowledge was validated by the subsequent words. "My pledge is more than a lifetime."
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.